This narrative commences within the walls of an educational institution. There, we encounter a young lady engrossed in contemplation regarding her male sibling. Her moment of reflection is abruptly disrupted when another female student bursts into the lecture hall, frenziedly demanding everyone's immediate notice. With exuberant enthusiasm, she proclaims that she has just laid eyes upon an exceptionally attractive young man in the administrative office. Evidently, he is a newly enrolled pupil and a member of the third-year class. The instant the aforementioned girl hears this news, she deduces that it must undoubtedly be her brother. Prior to delving further into this account, the young lady recounts that her brother was presumed deceased in an aerial disaster, a tragic airplane accident that also claimed the lives of their parents. However, in a miraculous turn of events, he reappeared after a protracted decade. Upon their initial reunion, she found herself scarcely able to trust her own vision. Their grandfather exhibited an identical astonishment upon witnessing his grandson's survival. When her brother's gaze met hers, she experienced a sudden fright, yet he simply offered a gentle smile in return and inquired if she was indeed his sister Dion. Dion's reverie is abruptly shattered by a clique of girls, attempting to intimidate her. These aggressors insist that she relinquish the gym attire she has brought with her. Dion endeavors to reason with them, emphasizing that if she surrenders her uniform, she will have nothing to wear. The fair-haired Azula merely scoffs at this and then commences shouting at her. Her voice is so deafening that even the other students in the classroom cannot disregard the disturbance she is creating. Without any provocation, the blonde bully ultimately goes too far and strikes Dion on the head, making it apparent that she had better hand over the clothing, or else she will cease being pleasant to her. While striking someone on the head would not be considered amiable, it seems no one is going to challenge this excessively flamboyant bully. Even the other students in the class simply avert their gaze, unwilling to intervene or prevent her from acting self-important. It appears Dion has no alternative but to endure the indignity and silently acquiesce to the order. The subsequent scene shifts to the third-year level, specifically Class 2, where the entire student body is being acquainted with a new, attractive classmate who recently transferred to the institution. The instructor remarks that he's resided abroad for an extended period and requests that everyone be welcoming and assist him in acclimating. All the female students in the classroom are visibly flushed by his striking appearance. Even the classroom bullies cannot help but scoff. Meanwhile, the other students with conventional appearances experience a twinge of envy towards the newcomer's striking features. The educator directs him to a vacant seat in the rear of the classroom, and he proceeds towards it, prepared to settle into his designated place. As the new student walks to his desk, we notice a ginger-haired individual named Jae-hyung, and it's evident that he's feeling utterly irritated. Frankly, he's simply envious that this newcomer is capturing all the attention with his physical attractiveness. The large student seated behind Jae-hyung provides a discreet gesture. Jae-hyung swiftly comprehends and resolves to intervene. He stretches out his leg, intending to trip the newcomer as he passes. But Jae-hyung's scheme doesn't unfold as seamlessly as anticipated, because the new arrival abruptly stops. Leaving Jae-hyung clenching his jaw in annoyance, he had executed his leg extension flawlessly, yet it proved utterly ineffective. Meanwhile, the newcomer, known as Jin incidentally, simply fixes Jae-hyung with a menacing glare for his feeble attempt. Although he remains silent, the scene abruptly shifts to Jin's past. A fair-haired man is seen, counseling Jin to refrain from engaging in altercations upon his return to Korea. Jin exhales and replies that he's already cognizant of this fact. The older man brightens upon hearing this and inquisitively inquires about the source of Jin's knowledge. Jin then elucidates that he wouldn't engage in any hostile situation without sufficient reconnaissance of his environment. Well, it appears Jin's reply isn't quite what the superior officer anticipated, because it sounds excessively intense. But Jin continues imparting his knowledge gleaned from years of service. He elucidates that a hasty choice could be fatal, and such an error would be a novice blunder. This further disquiets the senior officer, and our protagonist proceeds to remind his superior that he has endured numerous combat zones over the past decade because he's proficient in his field. Abruptly, Major Kang, the higher-ranking officer, instructs Jin to cease and clarifies that he wasn't alluding to all this tactical gibberish, but rather he doesn't want our protagonist engaging in altercations because he aims to shield the hapless perpetrator from a severe beating. At this juncture, the Major's counsel resonates with our protagonist. Thus, he remains silent to avert a confrontation. The instructor then observes Jin standing there passively and inquires if all is well. Jin merely offers a friendly grin. He replies that he's fine and proceeds past Ye-hyung, disregarding him. Ye-hyung chuckles again, believing Jin to be a coward, fearful of harassment. Even the individual who attempted to trip him earlier smirks, satisfied with Jin's response. Once Jin arrives at his desk, the instructor requests a student to assist him in preparing for the initial lesson. With that, the educator departs, after wishing Jin an enjoyable learning experience. The student seated beside Jin promptly introduces himself as Young Chan Park, and our protagonist reciprocates, presenting himself as Jin. Young Chan then, subsequently, anxiously glances behind him to ensure nobody is observing, and inclines closer to murmur that he comprehended Ye-hyung's intentions. He clarifies that Jo-hyung Lee is a disruptor, but there's an additional aggressor to be wary of, namely Hyuk Jin-ju, who's equally menacing. Jin scrutinizes both of the perpetrators as Young Chan divulges that the upcoming lesson is mathematics. Jin expresses gratitude to his new companion for the forewarning, and Young Chan is reassured to observe that our protagonist isn't just another intimidator. He encourages our protagonist to inquire about anything, and he'll endeavor to provide assistance. The mathematics instructor enters and directs everyone to open their course books. He commences resolving mathematical equations on the chalkboard. Several pupils are occupied jotting down notes, while others appear completely apathetic. Jin absorbs the environment, perceiving that Young Chan is diligently concentrating, while some students are slumbering or engaging in frivolous activities on their mobile devices. He also directs his gaze out the window, observing a cluster of pupils at play in the recreation area. Jin's thoughts wander back to his time as a soldier of fortune. He recalls the torrential downpour, feeling utterly drained and bruised. The tumult of his former life, the incessant barrage of gunfire and detonations, appears to have left an indelible impression on his psyche. Yet in the present moment, as he shuts his eyes, there's an absence of jarring sounds. Everything feels unexpectedly tranquil and serene. As daybreak nears, students begin their journey homeward. Among them is Dion, who notices her sibling standing close by. She's momentarily stunned and inquires if he has been awaiting her arrival. He confirms, expressing his hope to escort her home. However, he adds that if she has alternative arrangements, she's free to depart independently. Dion swiftly surveys her surroundings and asserts she has no other engagements, but we can discern that she remains quite apprehensive about accompanying our protagonist. Jin then proposes that if she's not occupied, they could stroll home together. Eventually, the young woman consents. Later on the pathway, the siblings walk alongside each other, both visibly uncomfortable. Jin attempts to alleviate the tension, inquiring if she feels uneasy as well. Diane is taken aback by his question, and swiftly asserts that she's perfectly at ease, but Jin assures her it's all right, confessing that he himself feels quite awkward. Fortunately, this comment finally allows the girl to loosen up a little. Jin then divulges that he was merely 9 years old during the incident. Therefore, his memories of his remaining relatives are fragmented, including his sister. He remarks that it must be rather peculiar for her as well, considering she was only 7 and likely has limited recollection too. Diane remains quiet because this is indeed accurate. Suddenly, she discerns recognizable voices nearby and abruptly stops in her tracks. Upon turning towards the origin of the sound, Diane recognizes one of her classroom tormentors. This girl is seemingly a companion of the blonde who struck Diane earlier at school. The aggressor immediately identifies Diane and calls out to her. Diane begins to perspire, feeling apprehensive about how to navigate the encounter. One of the boys accompanying the bully inquires about Diane's identity. The bully discloses that Diane is the girl Huijin despises, and that Huijin is the same blonde who assaulted her previously. The bully also notices Diane's brother walking alongside her, and begins to taunt her, inquiring if she's on a date. She adds insulting remarks, crudely stating her surprise that bitches can date. Diane becomes instantly shy, and desperately tries to clarify that Jin is her sibling. This revelation astonishes the bully, who was unaware that Diane had a brother. Having overheard the offensive language, Jin inquires whether this girl is Diane's acquaintance. Dion hesitantly concurs, and acknowledges their acquaintance from their shared homeroom class. But the arrogant girl persists, repeating the derogatory term, bitch, towards Dion, and questioning the inception of their friendship. Dion trembles as the aggressor continues her tirade. Jin then fixes the girl with an icy glare, one so intense it could freeze the depths of hell. The boy seated beside the bully takes exception to Jin's piercing gaze. He becomes irritated and cautions Jin to be mindful of his actions, lest he desires a forceful reprimand. Jin's unwavering glare further infuriates the overweight boy. The aggressive girl begins to goad him, inciting him to engage in a physical altercation with Jin. Finally, the heavy-set boy's patience reaches its limit and he advances towards Jin. Jin swiftly pushes Dane away and confronts the oaf directly. The overweight boy demands to know if Jin is attempting to appear intimidating in front of his sister. Jin observes the overweight man's vulnerability. Standing so near, all his critical areas are exposed to potential assault. Even more striking is the larger man's lack of any visible weaponry. His only apparent possession is his considerable posterior. Jin can't help but perceive the man's actions as reckless. He's practically inviting an attack. Major Kang's counsel resonates in Jin's memory. The advice to avoid unnecessary confrontations returns to him. Jin exhales, diverts his gaze, and opts for a discreet departure. However, the heavy-set man isn't willing to let Jin leave so readily. He seizes Jin's collar and lifts his hand menacingly. He's poised to strike Jin across the face. Before the blow lands, Dion intercedes swiftly, lowering her head in a deep bow. She offers an explanation to the aggressor. She explains Jin's unfamiliarity with Korean customs due to his upbringing abroad. He's unaccustomed to the local social dynamics. Meanwhile, the female bully scoffs at Diane's pleading gesture. Dion continues to tremble, consumed by fear. The corpulent man on the ota lashes out at Dion, declaring his indifference to Jin's residence, foreign or otherwise. Witnessing his sister's sheer terror, her trembling fear ignites Jin's fury. Consumed by rage, he seizes Fatty's wrist and yanks it forcefully. Fatty writhes in agony. Despite Jin's lack of overt aggression, Jin calmly discards his bag and sheds his school jacket. He instructs his sister to await his return and shields her face with the jacket, assuring her of a swift resolution. Suddenly, the boisterous ruffian charges at him from behind. Jin pivots gracefully and delivers a resounding slap to the hoodlum's cheek. The single blow sends the thug reeling, blood trickling from his lips as he staggers backward and collapses to the ground like a lifeless weight. A shiver of fear descends upon the arrogant girl and the remaining hooligan. It's evident they're on the verge of soiling themselves if our protagonist continues this display. Meanwhile, Jin releases a sigh of frustration, aware that he's reneged on his commitment to Major Kang, but perhaps the blame doesn't rest solely on his shoulders. As this corpulent scoundrel had this retribution coming, the other thug is utterly petrified that he's begun to reconsider any aggression against our protagonist. The subsequent scene transports us to the rural landscape, where military personnel are undergoing relentless training. Among them is Commander Kang, supervising the demanding drills. A fellow serviceman approaches from the rear and reminds Kang that today marks Jin's initial day at school. Upon hearing this, Major Kang becomes apprehensive that, despite 6 months of instruction on leading an ordinary existence, Jin might encounter difficulties adapting to a conventional academic life after numerous years as a hired soldier. Nevertheless, Kang experiences a feeling of paternal satisfaction, and he possesses confidence that the guidance he imparted to Jin will enable him to flourish in his new circumstances. Well, it appears Commander Kang's tutelage didn't entirely succeed, because Jin is making these tormentors appear like relics of the past. The remaining bullies gaze in astonishment as the incapacitated, overweight youth lies senseless. Eyes upturned, the female bully and her accomplice tremble with dread. In a split second, Jin lunged forward, delivering a crushing blow directly to the other assailant's stomach. The force sent him soaring backward, crashing hard onto the pavement. The arrogant girl's mouth gaped open in astonishment as Jin shifted his focus towards her. His menacing glare sent shivers of fright down her spine. Daeon removed the coat from her face, her hands quivering noticeably. She absorbed the scene. Both attackers lay incapacitated on the ground, although mere moments had passed since her face was covered. Jin perceived his sister observing him. After casting one final daunting glance at the haughty girl, he departed from her presence. He turned to Daeon, expressing remorse for abruptly covering her face. The apology only amplified Daeon's feeling of unease. Therefore, Jin attempted to alleviate the tension by proposing they purchase some treats from her preferred shop. Daeon stammered a response, insisting it wasn't necessary. Consequently, Jin determined they should simply return home. As Daeon and Jin walked closely together, the intimidating girl was left paralyzed with fear upon witnessing this. She's utterly astonished by how this individual, who was so intimidating with a mere glance, is now behaving like a kind, compassionate sibling as the pair stroll away. Diane offers a final amicable gesture before they depart, leaving the antagonistic girl standing motionless, her expression fixed in fright as they head homeward. Dion inquires if Jin was responsible for incapacitating those two men earlier. Jin affirms this, and it only intensifies her intrigue about her brother, because he doesn't appear to be someone who instigates conflicts. She then clarifies that in South Korea, prolonged eye contact can be deemed impolite and could result in awkward encounters. Jin concurs, adding that holding someone's gaze can be perilous, contingent on the recipient of the stare. This mirrors the customs of his place of origin. Perplexed, Dion asks why he glared at those hooligans before. Jin simply states that he perceived her fear and felt compelled to safeguard his sibling. Dion is taken aback by these unforeseen remarks, and she merely lowers her head, a blush creeping across her cheeks. An uncomfortable silence descends as they proceed with their walk. It appears Dion will have to acclimate to the presence of a solicitous sibling, constantly watching over her. Upon their return to the residence, we find Grandpa a picture of anxiety. He frantically urges Gin to relax and partake in some fruit, but our young man insists on attending to the washing up himself. Grandpa is uncertain how to react to this, so he ultimately allows Gin to assume the task. As Gin cleans the dishes with a steady hand, Grandpa inquires about the dinner's quality. He confesses that he isn't exactly a culinary expert. Gin, maintaining a casual demeanor, tells Grandpa not to worry about it. He declares the food was excellent and he relished each dish. The elderly man appears visibly relieved upon hearing Jin's enjoyment of the meal. A hint of contentment is even discernible on his face. Grandpa then directs his attention to Dion, inquiring of. She concurs with a nod. Grandfather changes the subject and inquires about Jin's initial day at school. He's inquisitive to learn if anything noteworthy occurred. Jin briefly hesitates, appearing slightly apprehensive about responding. Dion, too, experiences a touch of unease, contemplating the day's numerous events. But following a momentary pause, Jin acknowledges that it was a positive day. Grandfather's countenance beams with authentic delight upon hearing this, visibly relieved and content. Once everyone retires for the night, we discover our protagonist still fully awake. His mind recalls the moment his grandfather first laid eyes on him, and he can almost sense the profound gratitude his elder felt for his presence. Jin's frigid heart has gradually begun to thaw, after residing with his grandfather and sister for some time. Then, his thoughts wander to the instance he was trapped on that aircraft. Prior to its crash, the travelers were in a state of frenzy, and the emergency oxygen masks were deployed from their overhead compartments. As everyone frantically tried to secure their masks, Jin's parents concentrated on ensuring their son could breathe without difficulty. It was a harrowing experience for him. Just as the aircraft commenced its descent, Jin abruptly awakens in the present, bolting upright in his bed, gasping for air after the disturbing dream. His pulse is pounding, and he eventually recognizes it was merely a figment of his imagination. He glances at his timepiece and observes that daybreak has arrived. As he sits there in solitude, he perceives clattering sounds emanating from the living room. He rises and proceeds outwards, only to discover his sister readying the morning meal. He surveys his surroundings and inquires about his grandfather's whereabouts. She informs him that their grandfather departed for his occupation at sunrise. She clarifies that their grandfather utilized his vacation time to be present upon Jin's arrival. However, his allotted leave has concluded, necessitating his return to his job. She then dons her own attire, and upon completing her preparations, she decides to embark on her day. She notifies Jin that his breakfast is prepared and awaiting him on the table, and encourages him to ensure he nourishes himself. With that said, she departs, and Gin glances back at the assortment of food prepared for him. Back at the school, we observe the same intimidating girl and the fair-haired girl, Huijin. It appears that Huijin has learned that the newly arrived student from the previous day is Dion's sibling. The intimidating girl nervously verifies this information. Her thoughts revert to their prior encounter with Jin, and she feels distraught, recalling how he incapacitated two of her companions with a single blow. Huijin attempts to inquire why the intimidating girl is so apprehensive, but the intimidating girl remains paralyzed by fear, rendered speechless. I've become weary of referring to her as the intimidating girl, so let's simply assign her a suitable name. Let's call her Chicken Shake from this moment forward. Huijin persists in questioning Chicken Shake about the incident. Finally, Chicken Shake conquers her anxiety and declares that they should cease harassing Dion henceforth. The intense look Jin gave her remains etched in her memory, and it continues to linger. Despite her apprehension, she attempts to convince herself that everything will be all right, because Huijin and her brother are essentially the dominant force, and everyone at school submits to them. After some time, we see Dion again. As usual, she receives a harsh blow to the head. When she turns around, she observes Huijin and Chicken Shake together once more, there to intimidate her. Dion promptly inquires what they want. Huijin instructs her to accompany her briefly. Our protagonist asks where they're going. The arrogant blonde is visibly irritated and lashes out at Dion, warning her not to become overly confident and to comply with her demands if she wants to avoid a beating. She adds that having a brother won't make a difference. A short time later, we are at the school's recycling area, where Dion is being severely assaulted by the haughty blonde. After several powerful kicks, the blonde commands Dion to remain seated. Dion, gasping for air, inquires why she's being assaulted in the first place. That's the moment Huijin reminds her about her sibling. She informs Dion that her brother doesn't need to act tough, and cautions her to tell her brother to stop being so arrogant. She further emphasizes that they will no longer be accountable for Dion's brother, because he's in for a world of trouble. Dion, still oblivious, asks if this implies they're now targeting her brother. Huijin swiftly affirms, reminding her that the two bullies her brother defeated were associates of her brother. Since Dion and her brother dared to provoke them, they won't escape unscathed. It's akin to antagonizing a predator and expecting no repercussions. Dion's face turns completely white upon grasping this. She shouts at the two thugs, insisting on knowing their intentions for her brother, but her only reply is a forceful slap to the face. For her impertinence, the slap leaves a contusion on her cheek, but the sting of the physical discomfort is insignificant compared to the anguish she experiences, knowing her sibling is in grave danger. Dion grits her teeth, composes herself, and dashes out of the refuse center, leaving the two aggressive women in her wake. The scene shifts back to the third-year Class 2. The ambience is heavy with apprehension. Even the two unremarkable ruffians in the class are uncharacteristically silent. Everyone is tense, because the academy's most notorious bully is swaggering into the classroom with his posse, and it appears the conflict with Gin is about to escalate significantly. But Gin just remains there, completely unfazed. The two bullies who were defeated yesterday are also strutting in, with their ringleader trailing behind them. The most formidable bully of all, the Alpha, appears imposingly right on time. Dion storms into the room like a whirlwind. She's gasping for air. Her face is covered in contusions and her attire is smudged with grime. Jin abruptly rises from his chair, his eyes widening in astonishment as he absorbs the sight of his sister's battered visage. As he takes in his sister's injured face and soiled garments, the tyrannical boss initiates some jesting, taunting Jin about how his sister is deeply concerned for her brother's well-being. He remarks on how his own sibling, Huijin, does nothing but complain and pester him to perform tasks for her. Huijin then saunters onto the scene and reminds her brother that she will only feel sympathy when her brother actually suffers a thorough defeat at someone's hands. In the meantime, Jin is left visibly terrified observing his sister's injuries. But before his response is revealed, the scene transitions briefly to the past, to when pupils were just beginning to congregate in the classroom. Early in the morning, we see Young Chan's apprehensive expression as he endures blows to the head from two boisterous individuals who are utilizing his visage for marksmanship practice. Jae-hyung is feeling quite arrogant about his direct cranial impact and boasts to his companion about it. Hyuk-chan subsequently becomes irritated and commands a nearby pupil to relinquish his eraser. Once the apprehensive student proffers his eraser, Hyuk-chan swiftly seizes it. He brandishes his arm with maximum force and inflicts a precise blow to Yun-chan's head. He erupts into a celebratory jig after achieving the flawless strike. But Jae-hyung attempts to minimize it, asserting it was merely a fortuitous shot. The two comrades banter back and forth, endeavoring to surpass one another with their marksmanship abilities. Jae-hyung resolves to take another attempt, swinging his arm ferociously and hurling the eraser towards the unfortunate Young-chan. But astonishingly, Jin intervenes and the eraser strikes his torso instead. The two tormentors are vexed by the abrupt interference, and the eraser tumbles to the floor. Jin then sits directly beside the frightened young Chan. The redhead is visibly irate, sensing that Jin is finally irritating him. Hyo-chun attempts to reason with Jin for intervening, and the redhead readily concurs. Meanwhile, our protagonist simply places his bag on the desk and inquires if young Chan is all right. The timid boy mumbles that he is fine, but his ashen complexion reveals his distress. Young Chan simply inclines towards our protagonist, refraining from any eye contact with the bullies, and proposes spending time together after school. Jin explains that he must walk home with his sister, and therefore cannot join him. The young man brightens at this and inquires if his sibling transferred here with him. Jin shakes his head negatively, stating she was already enrolled here prior to his arrival. When Young Chan asks for her name, Jin informs him it's Dion. Young Chan is astonished to hear this, and Jin observes his abrupt response. So he questions his companion if he's acquainted with her. Initially, Young Chan feels hesitant to divulge anything, but confesses that Diane isn't having a pleasant experience at school recently. He elaborates that she was rather well liked in junior high for being intelligent and attractive, which garnered considerable attention from the boys. But then a fair-haired girl named Huijin, consumed by envy, began harassing her. Jin inquires if nobody intervened to prevent them from tormenting Dayan. Young Chan discloses that the girl who previously tormented her, Huijin, has a sibling named Gisu Kim, who's a notorious troublemaker at their school. To make matters worse, Dion is confined to the same classroom as Huijin, and she endures relentless harassment to the point where every classmate is astonished that she still possesses the fortitude to attend classes. Jin deduces the situation and comprehends that Huijin commenced tormenting his sister simply because someone had affections for Dion, and that constitutes the sole rationale for her victimization. However, Young Chan gloomily discloses that this is merely a pretext, as Huijong simply desired a justification to persecute someone. Jin's thoughts revert to a few days prior, when his grandfather expressed hope that Jin would experience a smoother transition, acclimating to his new academic environment. After residing abroad for an extended period, the grandfather then directs his attention to his granddaughter and inquires about her academic progress as well. At that juncture, young Dion sweetly reassures her grandfather that she is thriving and never betrays any indication of the hardships she encounters at school. Routinely, her grandfather commends her, remarking that Dion consistently demonstrates exceptional academic aptitude, and even her instructors offer high praise for her. In the present, Jin discerns that his sister was merely feigning courage and concealing her hardships to prevent their grandfather from feeling anxious. Suddenly, one of the boisterous bullies throws open the door, and the entire group of school tormentors strolls into the classroom. Hyukjin promptly inquires of this unruly bunch what they are doing in their class. Gisu Kim, one of the dominant figures in the entire school, simply states that he is there to attend to some matters. Hyojun is astonished to see Gisu and is uncertain how to react. Hyojun is comparatively insignificant. While he can manage the other bullies effectively, he is reluctant to become involved with Gisu Kim. Meanwhile, Gyu's subordinates inform him about Jin. Upon seeing Jin, Gisu begins yelling at his underlings, enraged that they were defeated by a meager weakling. He dismisses his cohorts and defiantly snaps his finger at Jin, beckoning him to approach. Jin rises instantly, while the redhead and Hyukjin appear utterly perplexed by Jin's actions in removing Gisu, and they're quite certain he's undeniably in a precarious situation now. Meanwhile, Jin stands his ground resolutely and inquires if Gisu is truly the person in authority here. Gisu sneers, finding it intriguing that our protagonist took his time to discern who holds power here. He turns to his subordinate and instructs him to cease standing idly and to take action. But we can distinctly perceive that the underling is absolutely terrified, yet he eventually advances toward Jin. However, before the confrontation commences, Daeon abruptly enters the classroom, gasping for air. Back in the present, this is how Jin finds himself observing his battered sister. Tears well up in Daeon's eyes as she commences apologizing to Jin for involving him in this predicament. Meanwhile, Huijin scoffs upon witnessing these tears and labels her the most melodramatic person ever. Jin, however, assures his sister she has no need for remorse, cutting her off before she can utter another syllable. He snaps, unleashing a ferocious slap upon the minion's face with such intensity that the lackey crumples to the ground, instantly unconscious. The remaining bullies, already aware of Gin's formidable strength, begin to tremble, witnessing their comrade's swift defeat. Gin turns to his sibling, declaring that these tormentors are the ones who owe an apology. The heavy-set bully lunges at Gin, fist clenched, but Gin effortlessly deflects the attack. Noticing the exposed throat, Gin delivers a swift, brutal strike with ninja-like precision, leaving the bully choking and gasping before collapsing. The other lackey, trembling with fear, attempts a punch, but Jin counters with a devastating blow to his ribs. With lightning-fast reflexes, he sends the lackey sprawling to the earth. Meanwhile, Gisu's arrogance begins to dissipate, as he witnesses Gin effortlessly dispatch his bullies, making them appear utterly insignificant. The regional underlings of this clique, still in their developmental phase, stand there with widened eyes and blank expressions, Even Huijin and Chicken Shake are panicking, utterly losing their self-control. After defeating the final two aggressors, Jin turns towards Gisu and articulates that his sister has been enduring hardship due to these hooligans and he won't tolerate it any longer. Gisu finally opts to speak, scoffing as he acknowledges that Jin is not weak after all. With a smug grin, Gisu launches his leg with incredible velocity towards Jin's face, but Jin effortlessly deflects the kick, leaving Gisu completely astonished because he hadn't anticipated our protagonist to respond so swiftly. Nevertheless, Gisu rapidly swings his other leg, which is also parried by Jin with ease. Jin grabs Gisu's leg, yanks him forward, and delivers a forceful blow to his face. The impact causes blood to splatter everywhere, as Gisu collapses to the floor like a limp puppet. Blood streams from his nose and mouth. He gazes upward in terror at Jean, who looms over him like a menacing grim reaper. Without a moment's pause, Jin swings his leg once more, connecting a forceful kick to the scoundrel's face. That sends a spray of blood flying. The once arrogant and self-assured antagonist finally crumples to the ground. Utterly defeated and humiliated, the entire classroom becomes pin-drop silent, everyone's eyes wide with astonishment as they witness Jin vanquish one of their most notorious tormentors. In a single decisive strike, the two lesser bullies are left speechless as well, incredulous that their classmate just effortlessly dismantled a major threat. Like Gisu, the girls are equally aghast, the blonde particularly stunned, struggling to comprehend Jin's true power. Jian begins to advance towards Huijin, who is overcome with fear, dreading the possibility of being struck and subjected to the same savage treatment. However, before anything further transpires, Diane hastily intervenes to halt her sibling. She implores him to desist from any further actions. Jin reminds her that Huijin and her cohort have been tormenting her for an extended period. He also reveals his awareness of her being victimized by them the previous day. Diane's expression falters as she comprehends that her brother has discovered the truth. She lowers her head silently. Suddenly, she recognizes that Jin is defending her. She quickly forces a smile, assuring her brother of her well-being and urging him to cease. Her brother initially hesitates, but ultimately acquiesces and decides to escort her to class. As they depart, the students in the room erupt in hushed discussions. They find it incredulous that Gisu, the dominant figure, was defeated by a lone boy. Even the subordinate bullies acknowledge Jin's formidable nature. They experience a sense of relief for not having challenged him previously. As the conversation persists, the fair-haired girl quivers in a blend of apprehension and shame, incapable of comprehending her loss. Meanwhile, as Jin and Diane stroll along, she conveys her astonishment at her brother's combat prowess, but then commences apologizing once more. Perplexed, Jin inquires about the reason for her apologies. Diane elucidates that it was her fault he was entangled in this predicament. She holds herself accountable for the altercations he had to withstand. Both yesterday and today, Jin offers Diane a comforting grin, assuring her that she needn't express remorse for anything, since this is the purpose of family, to safeguard one another. He then proceeds to clarify that in his former place of residence, individuals solely prioritized themselves. They were indifferent to the plight of others, provided they were not the ones enduring hardship. However, even those individuals would behave differently when their own kin were implicated. At that moment, the scene transitions to a flashback, depicting a tumultuous battleground, with smoke and detonations ripping through the vicinity. Small arms fire and shelling reverberated from both factions. Amidst the chaos, we observe a younger Jin ensnared in the pandemonium. Within the carnage, he notices one of the adversary's combatants, frantically attempting to rescue his young daughter, protecting her from a man aiming a firearm directly at their faces. Even amidst the brutality, the image of that soldier jeopardizing everything for his child profoundly impacted Jin. It prompted him to contemplate the true meaning of family and its significance in the present circumstances. Dion remarks that he scarcely recalls her. So why does he continue to exert himself to assist her? The boy concurs, acknowledging that he does not remember her, but maintains that it does not alter their familial connection. The girl remains silent, but as the boy's words resonate within her, she begins to feel somewhat self-conscious. She hastily assures him that she is all right, and that he should return to his classroom. She indicates that they've already arrived at her homeroom, so she offers a parting wave and disappears, leaving the boy with a subtle grin gracing his lips. Back in his classroom, Jin remains the dominant subject of discussion, and he's experiencing a degree of unease due to the abundance of attention he's receiving. The former bullies then offer him a gesture of approval, enthusiastically inquiring about the type of training he received abroad, since he defeated those inexperienced opponents as if they were insignificant. They continue to lavish him with accolades, but the boy simply sinks deeper into his chair, appearing somewhat overwhelmed. Even his companion, young Chun, interjects, remarking that he was quite impressive. This elicits a faint smile from Jin. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to the vanquished hooligans, who are experiencing considerable anxiety following their humiliating defeat. Their leader, in particular, remains enraged, complaining that there's something distinctive about our protagonist, because he doesn't fight like a typical low-level punk. His sibling attempts to console him, encouraging him to cease his brooding. She emphasizes that their defeat was merely a stroke of bad luck, and Jin simply caught them unprepared. Thus, she proposes they endeavor to apprehend him later. However, the aggressors remain taciturn, having discovered firsthand that their adversary is a formidable force. He's not someone to be trifled with even now. The fair-haired individual reminds her he's just a solitary person, and they shouldn't permit a single individual to defeat them in such a manner. Her brother finally silences her, stating that if she's yearning for a confrontation, she can confront the boy herself if she deems it so simple. Naturally, Huijin resents her brother's tone, retorting that he shouldn't vent his anger on her, simply because he was soundly defeated by an ordinary individual. Her brother is utterly enraged, and it's evident Huijin's words have struck a nerve. He is consumed by fury, because it's universally understood she's voicing an unpleasant reality. Huijin fixes him with a final icy glare, her eyes brimming with tears, born from the exasperation of witnessing her brother's behavior. Silently, she pivots and exits, the door slamming shut behind her. As she strides angrily down the hallway, Chicken Shake hastens to catch up. In the meantime, Blondie is seething with rage. It's profoundly irritating to her that the entire group of bullies couldn't manage a single opponent. She flings the door open, storming into the classroom, and upon spotting Daeon seated inside, she confronts the girl, remarking that she must feel quite fortunate to now have a brother. She emphasizes how Daeon can now attend school without a single worry, and simply seek refuge with her older brother should trouble arise. Daeon remains utterly silent, which only intensifies Huijin's annoyance. She believes Daeon is ignoring her, simply because her sibling is present. She clenches her jaw in annoyance, and asserts that she won't permit Daeon to behave as she pleases, merely because she has a brother. As twilight descends, pupils begin their journey homeward, and amidst the throng is our protagonist, appearing quite despondent, lost in contemplation. She reminisces about the incident where her sibling defended her and confronted those hooligans. She recalls him declaring they are kin, and ponders if this signifies she can finally attend classes without the apprehension of being harassed. Her thoughts revert to her wretched days under Huijin's dominion, where she was perpetually ordered about and complied with every directive like an obedient canine. Whenever she attempted to advocate for herself, she would be abruptly silenced. Her sibling materializes behind her and inquires if something is troubling her. She is taken aback by this unexpected address, but our young man reminds her that he had hailed her several times prior. However, she remained unresponsive. The sister swiftly apologized, clarifying that she hadn't heard him. She then inquired if he had been waiting for her once more. The boy affirmed with a nod. He stated that he was still unsure of the route back to his residence. Thus, they embarked on their journey together. They discussed procuring some provisions along the way, as their grandfather invariably developed a ravenous appetite when he arrived home late. As they strolled alongside one another, the aggressive woman lingered behind them. She appeared utterly enraged, unable to tolerate the sight of the girl's smile. This woman was biding her time, awaiting the opportune moment to obliterate Daeon's happiness. The subsequent scene depicts the pair browsing the store. The girl seemed to be encountering difficulty selecting items, while fellow shoppers observed the duo. Female patrons couldn't avert their gaze from the boy. Daeon couldn't help but perceive the considerable female attention he was attracting. She was aware of his popularity at school, but it appeared he was remarkable even beyond its walls. Driven by inquisitiveness, Daeon finally inquired if her brother had ever had a romantic partner. Back during his time abroad, the unexpected question caught him off guard, and he seemed as if he'd never encountered the concept of a girlfriend before. Observing his bewilderment, Daeon elaborated, explaining that she meant a girl he might be courting. He simply responded that he hadn't had any, which led his sister to propose that he should contemplate finding a girlfriend, particularly because he invariably drew girls to him like moths to a flame. Wherever he went, the young man remained silent briefly, before stating that he'd consistently been too preoccupied to devote time to a romantic relationship. Deanne comprehended his perspective, especially considering he'd been immersed in adapting to a foreign land. At that point, the young man countered with the same question, inquiring if she had ever had a boyfriend. The inquiry takes her by surprise, and she promptly responds that she hasn't had one either. When he inquires why, she simply states she's been preoccupied as well. When they finally arrive home, we observe our young protagonist has received a Samsung Galaxy smartphone from his grandfather. He's slightly let down because he desired an iPhone instead. Grandpa swiftly enlightens his grandson that iPhones have subpar battery performance. Thus, it's preferable to utilize a Samsung, particularly because all the children these days possess iPhones. It's a somewhat humorous dig, implying that owning a Samsung might actually make him unique. Dayon, conversely, is quite enthusiastic because she desired a Galaxy phone for herself, and she can discern it's the current model. The boy commences experimenting with the phone, while Grandpa discloses he's already stored Dayon's and his own contact information in it. Dayon is astonished to discover that Grandpa input the phone numbers himself, as she typically assists with such tasks. Grandfather swiftly clarifies the situation, explaining that he received assistance from the sales representative. He adds with a smile that he's aware of how much young people enjoy unpacking new items themselves, so they hope their grandson wouldn't object to the fact that he opened the packaging to preserve their contact information. In response, Jin promptly states that he's completely okay with it. Grandfather then expresses his apologies to Dayon, mentioning that the shop only had one of those mobile phones in stock, preventing him from purchasing one for her as well. Dayon assures him it's not a problem, and they proceed to have a wonderful dinner, conversing and relishing their quality family time. Later that evening, the boy continues to experiment with his new device, and he's truly immersing himself in the Galaxy experience. He begins to contemplate that perhaps Samsung phones aren't so undesirable after all, and might potentially surpass iPhones. The scene transitions to Major Kang, who is diligently working on his computer when his telephone rings. He answers it and observes that it's Jin C, who informs his superior about his new mobile device and provides his updated contact number. The superior is somewhat taken aback by this information, as is the subordinate standing behind him. The subordinate inquires if Major Kang hadn't already provided Gin with a cellular phone. Major Kang affirms that he indeed had. At that moment, the superior becomes visibly enraged, emphasizing that he had given Gin the priciest iPhone available. He is quite indignant that Gin has already replaced his phone. The following morning arrives, and Gin emerges from a refreshing shower and observes his sister hurrying out in her attire. Before she departs, Gin questions why she is leaving so early. She informs him that she is actually behind schedule and quickly exits without delay. She also reminds him that supper is already prepared, so his only task is to place the dishes in the wash basin. As she is rushing down the road, she briefly looks at her cell phone and is reassured to see she will arrive punctually. She had been held up since she desired to prepare a delectable broth for Grandpa, and witnessing his grin after consuming it made the effort worthwhile. She's simply content to perform a kind deed for him. Her fleeting moment of joy is abruptly interrupted when she receives a forceful blow to her ribs and collapses onto the pavement. Towering above her are three adolescents, all adorned in hooded sweatshirts and facial coverings to conceal their identities. The one in the forefront instructs Dion to pay attention to her surroundings and blames her for almost causing her to twist her ankle. It's evident these young women are merely seeking conflict and fabricating reasons to instigate an altercation. They mandate that Dion express remorse for her alleged misstep. The frightened girl promptly nods and conveys her sincere apologies. However, the boisterous ringleader remains displeased and strikes Dayon across the cheek. She demands that she apologize in a subservient manner. That's when one of the girls with a hair tie proposes they all proceed to a karaoke establishment to unwind. Another, suggesting they unwind and enjoy themselves. The girl with the ponytail stoops to Dayon's eye level, wearing a self-satisfied smirk. She proposes Dayon join their karaoke gathering, confident they'll have a fantastic time. The moment Dayon registers the voice, she immediately discerns it's Huijin Kim, and she's undoubtedly present to torment Dayon. Suddenly, they find themselves at a seedy karaoke establishment. The proprietor, observing the dubious-looking girls, experiences a sense of unease. Moments later, the manager reappears, anxiously pacing towards the room where the girls occupied for their karaoke session. He grumbles about the boisterousness of today's youth and contemplates the potential disarray left behind. Throughout their entire karaoke performance, He solely heard ear-splitting shrieks. The manager manipulates the handle and opens the door, only to discover Dayan lying unconscious on the floor, visibly bruised, but fortunately, she's responsive and begins to gradually rise. She grapples with her belongings, her hand trembling as she collects her possessions. The proprietor is utterly bewildered by this unforeseen spectacle and resolves to summon emergency medical services. But Dayan adamantly declines and staggers out the entrance. Meanwhile, back in the lecture hall, the instructor is conducting roll call and observes that Dayan remains absent. When the pupils verify her non-attendance, everyone is perplexed, as Dayan wouldn't simply skip class without informing someone. In the backdrop, Huijin Kim is grinning smugly, clearly delighted with herself. Chicken Shake inquires of her companion if she believes Dayan will be all right. In reply, Huijin simply advises her friend against undue alarm. She reminds her that Dayan's truancy is unrelated to them. Chicken Shake anxiously concurs, feigning agreement and confirming its veracity, asserting it's unrelated to them. At last, the dismissal bell chimes, indicating the conclusion of classes. As customary, the boy awaits his sibling outside, but he struggles to locate her amidst the throng of pupils. The multitude starts to disperse, and presently scarcely anyone remains. Yet his sister is still conspicuously absent. He lingers briefly, then retrieves his mobile phone and attempts to contact her, pondering if she might have already departed for home. In the meantime, she has already arrived home, and her telephone rings incessantly as her brother persists in calling. However, she deliberately ignores the calls, allowing it to ring unanswered. Ultimately, the boy returns home. His gaze immediately falls upon the footwear she wears, placed by the entrance. He removes his backpack and approaches her room, tapping softly and inquiring if she is within. The girl promptly replies, and the brother experiences a surge of reassurance, knowing she is indeed present. Dion swiftly inquired if Jin had lingered outside the school grounds that day as well. Jin recognized Diaz and revealed he had even attempted to contact her, but she hadn't responded. The young woman offered a sincere apology, explaining that she must have been slumbering. Jin perceived the unusual inflection in her voice and inquired if he might enter briefly. Dion promptly fabricated a pretext, claiming she was in bed due to feeling unwell. Concerned, Jin asked if it was anything grave. She reassured him it was merely a mild temperature, and that she would recover with some repose. Jin advised her to contact him if she required anything, and decided to depart, intending to procure some medication for her. But Jin abruptly halted at the threshold, and noticed her athletic shoes were marred with bloodstains. It didn't require much time for him to deduce that something significant must have transpired, as blood on her footwear wasn't a commonplace occurrence. Once he assembled the clues, he retrieved the medical kit and proceeds to her room to address her wounds. She grimaces as he applies dressings to her contused face. It appears Jin remains unaware of the complete narrative, Dian informs him, that she tumbled down the staircase while evading a cyclist. However, Jin remarks that her injuries appear rather extensive for a minor mishap and inquires if she would like to consult a physician. She wavers momentarily before asserting she is perfectly well. Her reluctance to seek medical attention is comprehensible. Should she visit the hospital? The medical staff would discern the contusions are not from a fall. The sequence then transitions to Dayan's past, placing us in the headmaster's office. Dion is recounting to the headmaster that she was assaulted by Huijin. However, Huijin vehemently refutes the allegations. Law enforcement is also engaged in the matter, and Dion maintains that Huijin was her assailant. She clarifies that Huijin was disguised with a mask and hat, but she recognized her voice and is certain of her identity. Furthermore, but then Huijin, with a cunning grin, inquires how Dian can incriminate her without even seeing her face. The headmaster questions Dian, asking if she witnessed the countenance of her attacker. Daan reiterates that the assailant's face was obscured, but she remains convinced it was Huijin. At this juncture, Huijin's mother erupts in fury. She vehemently accuses Dayan of contacting the authorities and handling her daughter like a delinquent over a preposterous allegation. The principal attempts to pacify the enraged mother, but she remains defiant, asserting that she will not be appeased. Meanwhile, Huijin's self-assurance disintegrates, as she discerns that no one appears to believe her. Despite her conviction that Huijin was the perpetrator, even the law enforcement officers are dubious. The mother insists that Diane promptly apologize to her daughter for the indictment, but our protagonist stands firm, declaring to the woman that it was undeniably her daughter who attacked her. The haughty mother is enraged by this and resolves to address the issue with Dion's guardians. She insists our young lady summon her parents to the school immediately. This utterly devastates Dion. She senses tears involuntarily cascading down her cheeks. Meanwhile, the aggressor who accosted her snickers and departs. Currently unaccountable, she feels ensnared in a predicament mirroring her past experiences. She deems protesting without concrete evidence pointless, and is adamant about not upsetting her grandfather, who has consistently been a pillar of support for her. Abruptly, Jin perceives her strained countenance and rests his hand on her brow, inquiring if she is truly all right. The girl replies, albeit faintly, that she is well. Jin remarks that while her bones remain intact, the contusions are quite pronounced and will cause discomfort for several days. She concurs and finds it unexpected that he's rather adept at this, mending things, because she can discern that the dressings are impeccably applied. Her expression turns melancholic as she recalls their grandfather. She's apprehensive he might become distressed by all of this, particularly because he has a fragile heart. This information comes as a shock to Jin, and the young girl divulges further that their grandfather uses medication to manage his cardiac health. In response, Jin assures her that he'll ensure their grandfather remains completely unaware of this challenging situation. He advises her to simply rest. As he starts to depart, she calls out to him from behind her. With a warm smile, she expresses gratitude for his assistance. Jin reciprocates with an equally friendly smile, but once he's out of sight, her smile disappears. She contemplates whether she made the correct decision by withholding information. She feels there's little that adolescents like herself and her brother can actually do to resolve the matter. Nevertheless, we are aware that Jin is no ordinary teenager, and I wouldn't be astonished if he's already aware of the perpetrator behind her trauma. Later, we're transported to a nightclub, where the vibrant music pulsates and the crowd is energized. Amidst the revelry, we locate the leader, the intimidating Gisu Kim. He's clenching his jaw as he imbibes and chuckles with his companions. They're all conversing about Jin and pondering how a lone youngster could disrupt everything for them. A henchman interjects, reminding them that their failure stemmed from misjudging Jin. He asserts that they can effortlessly eliminate him with proper planning. Another thug concurs, stressing that they cannot allow him to escape unscathed. A third one adds that Jin will be powerless against their collective force. Despite their fervor, their leader understands defeating Jin won't be effortless. He's still fuming from the mortifying loss, but refuses to ignore it. He slams his glass down in exasperation and grudgingly concurs with his underlings. He emphasizes that a one-on-one confrontation isn't their modus operandi. Therefore, they should devise a tactical approach to defeat our protagonist. With superior numbers, the henchmen beam with mischievous delight, visibly enthusiastic about their scheme. This boisterous crew may believe they have everything meticulously planned, but they're merely a cowardly pack of scavengers, fated to face retribution from Jin eventually. Just as they're plotting their subsequent action, Gisu's cellular device vibrates. The incoming call display indicates a contact designated Little Brat. It happens to be his younger sister, and it appears even Gisu shares our sentiment that she is indeed a nuisance. Regardless, she begins berating him, inquiring why he's idling at the nightclub. Gisu instructs her to state her purpose or he will terminate the call. The girl asserts that he is significantly indebted to her. Gisu perplexedly questions what she's referring to. She then discloses that he assaulted Dion earlier that day. She declares that they cannot allow the siblings to escape consequences, or they'll forfeit their dominance over the entire school. Her brother, experiencing a surge of pride in his sibling, commends her for a job well done. He discloses that they're also orchestrating retribution against Gin. Just then, an individual enters the establishment. As the aggressors turn to ascertain the newcomer's identity, they recognize it's Jin. He seems to be present to address a matter. Gisu becomes utterly enraged at the sight of Jin, nonchalantly strolling into their territory. But Jin simply advances towards their table with a composed demeanor. Gisu subsequently experiences a sense of relief that they no longer need to pursue Jin to exact their vengeance. Nevertheless, Jin isn't present for amicable conversation either, and without squandering any time, he seizes one of the henchmen by the face and forcefully slams him against the table's edge. Another minion lunges at him, but Jin's hand moves with such swiftness that a single blow fractures all the assailant's ribs. The lead aggressor and his cohorts clenched their jaws, witnessing their henchmen fall. The remaining members of the gang lunged at Jin, but he remained remarkably composed. As they drew near, he effortlessly tripped one of them, displaying true mastery. Next, he seized the individual with purple hair and violently slammed him onto the table with a resounding crash. While the purple-haired individual recoiled in fear, Jin continued his assault. He hurled the man against the wall like a lifeless object. Then he clenched his fist and delivered a crushing blow to the overweight man's face. One of the thugs brandished a glass bottle and swung it at Jin, but Jin nonchalantly disarmed him and followed up with a forceful strike to his face. The blow left the thug with blood pouring from his mouth. Another assailant charged from the rear, but Jin ducked, grasped his hand, twisted it agonizingly, and then delivered a powerful slap to his face. Jin hurls the ruffian aside and then seizes another henchman by the face. He slams the guy's unpleasant visage directly into his knee, fracturing the thug's nose with a gruesome crack. With all the hoodlums incapacitated, Gisu is rendered speechless, incapable of comprehending the unfolding events. Meanwhile, his sibling remains on the call, and she promptly inquires about the situation. Because she has been detecting the loud disturbance and pandemonium, Jin pivots to Gisu with an icy tone in his voice, causing Gisu to tremble. He asks if he needs to reiterate himself, because as far as Jin recollects, he has already instructed Gisu to avoid his sister. Gisu is utterly bewildered, astounded by the complete reversal of circumstances. It's somewhat ironic that they attempted to assault Jin en masse, only to end up being thoroughly defeated themselves. Jin battled like an expert, and effortlessly vanquished everyone in mere seconds. Meanwhile, Jin continues to interrogate Gisu, inquiring what his sister ever did to provoke him. Gisu feigns ignorance, pretending to be oblivious. Meanwhile, he surreptitiously reaches for a glass on the table. With lightning-fast reflexes, he hurls the glass at Jin, but Jin effortlessly sidesteps, allowing the glass to shatter against the wall behind him. As he stands there, unfazed and indifferent, Gisu snatches a bottle and swings it menacingly. Our protagonist evades the blow once again. He dodges the attack, but when Gisu takes another swing, Jin disarms him and retaliates with a swift punch. The impact sends the bottle's contents spraying across the room. Gisu attempts a punch of his own, but our hero counters with a brutal blow to the scoundrel's face. Blood gushes from his nose. Gisu staggers backward, struggling to breathe after the impact, while Jin remains calm and collected. He hasn't even broken a sweat. Jin then confronts the villain, demanding to know what sick satisfaction he derives from tormenting a defenseless woman. In a last-ditch effort, Gisu grabs another bottle. He smashes the bottle and brandishes the jagged fragments toward Jin's chest. But our protagonist displays no trepidation. With lightning speed, he forcefully strikes Gisu's hand. The bottle clatters to the ground as he seizes Gisu by the throat, constricting his airway. Gisu gasps, struggling to inhale. Gisu's legs flail beneath him as he desperately fights back. Jin violently slams him onto the floor. The scoundrel thrashes and squirms. He frantically attempts to escape Jin's unyielding grasp. But our hero maintains his relentless pressure. His hand remains firmly fixed on Gisu's throat. He ensures the formerly arrogant bully understands precisely who dominates now. Jin leans closer and inquires about Gisu's fate. Barely conscious after the merciless assault, Gisu cannot articulate a reply. Jin issues his ultimatum. He unequivocally states this is his final act of mercy. He commands Gisu to remain distant from his sister and to control Huijin, who is Gisu's sibling as well. He stresses that, if even a whisper reaches him about Gisu or Huijin harassing his sister, he vowed to return and complete his unfinished business. To emphasize his point, Jin further constricted his hold on the scoundrel's throat, forcing him to the verge of losing consciousness. The aggressor became frantic, and in desperation began writhing and profusely begging for forgiveness. Jin finally loosened his grasp, allowing Gisu to gasp for breath and cough violently as Jin departed. As Jin exited the establishment, the employees inside exchanged apprehensive looks, uncertain about the events that had just transpired. In the meantime, Huijin and her companion, Chicken Shake, were ambling along the street. Huijin experienced a sense of foreboding and began to fret that her sibling might be in danger. Upon reaching the club, they detected approaching footsteps ascending the staircase. It was Jin, nonchalantly making his departure. Huijin was taken aback and hesitant about how to react. She called out to Jin, demanding he halt, believing she could still maintain her composure, since nobody can assign responsibility for her actions towards Dayan. But Jin doesn't even pause. Huijin, now genuinely apprehensive, commences retreating, stumbles, and lands forcefully on her backside. As she massages her aching shoulder, Jin's cellular device rings. He glances at it and observes it's his grandfather calling. Following a brief conversation, he simply rotates and heads homeward silently, leaving them perplexed regarding his thoughts. When Huijin gains entry to the club room, the area is in disarray. Her sibling and his companions are all injured and showing signs of a beating. She instantly starts berating him, insisting on knowing how Jin defeated him once more. However, her brother, too depleted to dispute, interrupts her and instructs her to completely avoid Dayan. Henceforth, Huijin, failing to comprehend the gravity of the circumstances, persists in inquiring what he's referring to. Her brother, visibly agitated, ultimately snaps. He clenches his teeth and shouts at her to leave Dayan alone. But Huijin refuses to yield and continues yelling. Inquire as to why he harbors such fear for that scoundrel. That's the final straw. Her sibling erupts, eyes ignited with fury. He makes it abundantly clear that if she doesn't stay away from Dayan, he'll personally ensure she suffers the consequences. Yikes! This pair of siblings has a truly warped method of interacting. It's astonishing how casually they discuss sabotaging one another. Huijin is visibly distressed by her brother's tirade and begins to weep. We return to our protagonist, who catches sight of the grandfather once more. They settle onto a park bench. Initially, the grandfather expresses remorse for pulling our protagonist away while he was enjoying himself with his companions. But our protagonist dismisses it, saying it's all right. The elderly man then becomes somewhat somber, remarking that Dayan sustained injuries, and our protagonist was the one who tended to her wounds. Our protagonist verifies this. The elderly gentleman elaborates that her wounds are quite severe, but she's resistant to seeking hospital treatment. He expresses the difficulties of single-handedly raising Dion. He admits to a lack of experience in nurturing a young girl and constantly toiled to provide for her. He feels immense gratitude for her resilience and accomplishments. Grandpa reminisces about the past years, acknowledging that, in retrospect, Dion has enriched his life far beyond what he could ever offer her. The accident stripped him of everything he possessed. Dion became his sole motivation and anchor following the devastating plane crash. The crash robbed him of all his worldly possessions. Witnessing her pain deeply grieves him, especially since she conceals the true source of her anguish. He ponders if she perceives him as too old to comprehend her struggles. He alludes to a proverb about the growing emotional distance between children and parents as they mature. Therefore, connecting with an elderly gentleman must be even more challenging for her. However, our lad swiftly reassures the senior citizen that he's merely overthinking the situation. He emphasizes that Grandpa's affection for Dion is readily apparent, and he's certain Dion reciprocates those feelings wholeheartedly. He advises Grandpa to cease his excessive worrying and pledges to keep a watchful eye on her at school. Upon hearing this, the elder gentleman finally experiences a sense of relief and is genuinely delighted that Dion has a brotherly figure in her life. The subsequent scene transitions to the Omnia Medical Evaluation Facility. Within we observe Gisu. His wounds finally treated, he's receiving a severe reprimand from his father, who is evidently displeased with him. His dad doesn't mince words, emphasizing that Gisu deserved each and every one of those injuries because, as he states, engaging in foolish activities inevitably leads to foolish consequences. The haughty mother begins to berate her spouse. Visibly indignant, she reminds him that their son is currently hospitalized, and this is the extent of his response. She instructs him to locate the ruffian responsible for this and berate him instead. She further indicates that the same bully fractured Huijin's arm as well. Frankly, it's a complete debacle. Huijin is a manipulative person, to the extent that she even attributed the fault for her own accident. To our friend, we all know she stumbled and injured her shoulder, but rather than accepting accountability, she's holding him liable for everything. The irate father eventually composes himself and releases a profound sigh. The solicitous mother advises her son to concentrate on recuperating and convalescing as they begin to depart. The mother complains about making the child who harmed their son atone, should she ever encounter him. Once they are gone, Gisu finally inquires of his sister why she felt compelled to divulge everything to their parents. He elucidates that, by doing so, she has only exacerbated the situation for him. He feels mortified. He worries that others will assume he complained to his parents like a whimpering child after being assaulted. His sister then questions how she was expected to conceal the reality that her sibling was hospitalized and that her arm was fractured. Jisoo becomes enraged and inquires if Jin was responsible for her injury. She recalls stumbling and falling, but she omits this information. Instead, she solely attributes blame to Jin. It's appalling how she's deflecting responsibility so brazenly. She abruptly rises and instructs him to remain there and recuperate. She vows to ensure they definitively understand. They're adversaries, Jisoo remains seated, uncertain if they should provoke our protagonist again. Meanwhile, the scene shifts back to their parents. The mother discloses that she just conversed with Mr. Chi. However, her spouse questions her involvement and advises her to allow the school to address the situation. The mother counters that it's already Saturday, and she refuses to remain passive and inactive. As she anticipates their arrival, she erupts in a shout, vehemently asserting that the educational institution won't dispense genuine repercussions for the harm inflicted upon their offspring. She contends that they'll probably only agree to a temporary removal or a permanent expulsion at most. Her spouse persists in the disagreement, declaring that it's inappropriate for her to approach Mr. Cha to resolve this matter independently. The woman discloses that she's already acquainted with Mr. Chao and that he's been managing his illicit activities for a considerable period. Concurrently, Huijin is surreptitiously listening and experiencing a sense of self-satisfaction regarding her mother's communication with Mr. Cha. She recognizes Mr. Cha as the intimidating mobster employed by her father. She's confident that this will definitively quell those agitators. Conclusively, the setting transitions to a dilapidated location where a man is nervously fiddling with his lighter, visibly apprehensive. Two thugs stroll by, exhibiting evident dissatisfaction. They complain about being instructed by their superior to address some adolescent squabble. None of them express any enthusiasm for the task. Even the head honcho himself isn't particularly keen on addressing this childish dispute. But well, work is work. Even if it entails enduring a barrage of adolescent drama, the sequence shifts to a prior moment, where an opulent Mercedes is speeding down the highway. Within the vehicle, Mr. Cha, the syndicate leader, receives a phone call from the lady. She informs him about the circumstances of her daughter's broken arm and her son's assault by a certain youth. She vehemently demands his intervention. Returning to the present, Mr. Cha exhales a cloud of smoke from his cigarette, visibly enraged. He's utterly exasperated at having to manage this trivial matter. Subsequently, the scene transitions back to the living space, where our protagonist is seated in front of his monitor, still contemplating his interaction with the gang members. He ponders whether these individuals will genuinely drop the issue. Abruptly, the doorbell chimes. He overhears his grandfather in a heated discussion with someone at the entrance. It becomes apparent that the individuals on their doorstep are seeking Jin. The imposing figure outside asserts that they simply desire a brief conversation with Jin. Grandpa, troubled by the late hour, inquires about the nature of the urgent matter. Their grandson emerges from his room, assuring his grandfather of his swift return after ascertaining their purpose. Despite his grandfather's apprehension and even his sister's objections, Jin offers a reassuring smile. He guarantees them that he's acquainted with these individuals and that it's merely a quick exchange. There's no cause for alarm, he assures them. The young man departs, leaving his worried grandfather behind. The thugs escort him to a deserted construction zone. He contemplates the identity of the person they might be leading him to. Upon their arrival, the henchmen inform their superior that they have delivered the individual in question. The boss remains taciturn, inhaling from a cigarette. The hairless underling discloses that the youngster quickly grasped the situation, didn't create a disturbance, and simply complied. The leader, somewhat astonished and gratified, resolved to expedite the matter. He snapped his fingers, and the henchmen instantly seized their metal pipes. One goon instructed his companion to restrain the young man's arm, as he would be the one to inflict the punishment. Meanwhile, the boss exhaled and opted to message the mother, informing her that the task had been handled. As the boss navigated his phone, searching for the mother's contact information, the thugs inquired, questioning why the young man had provoked the Kim family's offspring. The moment the young man heard the reference to children, he deduced that it must concern Gisu Kim. The boss, feeling agitated and vexed, interrupted his search. He determined that he shouldn't contact her while the young man was present. Nevertheless, he glanced at the young man and was captivated by his composed and impassive demeanor. Just as the henchman lunged towards him, Jin abruptly unleashes his ninja-esque velocity. Intercepting the bald henchman's hand mid-swing, he yanks the man forward, delivering a ferocious shoulder strike directly to the goon's face. The kingpin observes, eyes wide with astonishment, as he witnesses the impeccable execution of the maneuver. Meanwhile, the other accomplice, bat in hand, takes a swing at our protagonist. He ducks, allowing the bat to whoosh harmlessly overhead. The thug attempts another swing, but our hero charges the bat as if it poses no threat. The mafia leader is left utterly dumbfounded. With lightning-fast reflexes, our hero traps the baseball bat in his arm and lands a powerful blow directly beneath the lackey's jaw. Without pausing, he follows up with a crushing blow to the henchman's chest. Then, with a vice-like grip, he seizes the goon by the throat and hurls him onto the pavement below. The crime boss gazes in stunned silence, visibly awestruck and utterly astonished by the sheer prowess and audacity of our protagonist's maneuvers. The hairless henchman seizes our hero from behind, issuing a death threat, but our young man swiftly jabs his shoulder into the goon's ribs and then delivers a forceful shoulder strike to his face, sending him crashing to the floor. Mr. Chow discerns that this youngster is no ordinary adolescent because his combat abilities are extraordinary. He ultimately resolves to intervene personally. As he saunters forward, he scratches his head, chuckling and remarking that he never anticipated battling teenagers at his age. Meanwhile, our protagonist can perceive that although this man is a syndicate leader, he's still a pushover, because our guy can easily identify all of the man's vulnerabilities. As the boss throws a mighty punch at him, Jin nimbly evades it. The boss then unleashes a flurry of blows, but our hero dodges each one effortlessly, making it appear like a stroll in the park. As their exchange continues, our protagonist swiftly evades, but a subsequent blow comes directly at him. He intercepts the strike, though the sheer impact forces him to slide backward. The mob leader scoffs, astonished that he parried that one as well. Meanwhile, Jin examines his wrist where he absorbed the punch, and his hand flinches from the throbbing discomfort. He discerns that the crime lord anticipated his actions and landed the blow with pinpoint accuracy. Conversely, the mafia boss's inquisitiveness has finally climaxed. He inquires about Jin's true identity. Jin nonchalantly responds that he's merely a secondary school pupil. The boss remains skeptical. He deduces this youngster must possess considerable prowess and expertise. To fight with such skill, Jin assumes his stance with a smirk. The boss declares his readiness to continue sparring and clenches his fist to strike our young hero. Our protagonist swiftly diverts an oncoming fist and attempts to retaliate with a punch of his own, but the mob boss evades it with ease. The kingpin then launches an attack, but our protagonist seizes his hand and throws a punch towards his abdomen. The crime lord retaliates, leading our hero to inadvertently land a blow directly to his face. Mr. Cha is visibly infuriated after receiving the blow, squarely across his face, and attempts to retaliate with another punch. Again, our young hero parries the attack and, locking gazes with his adversary, delivers a ferocious strike to his face. He follows up with a barrage of forceful blows, sending Mr. Cha crashing to the ground, leaving him utterly mortified by the adolescent. It's remarkable to witness a mafia leader who resorts to fisticuffs rather than firearms. Once Mr. Cha is subdued, he smirks, observing that our protagonist appears completely unfazed by the altercation. He's baffled by the kid's origins, but he's certain the Kim family is undeniably provoked the ire of a formidable adversary. The setting shifts to the headquarters of this organization, recognized as the domain of National Assembly Representative Kim. Within the edifice, 2 security personnel stand guard outside an office. Inside the room, we observe Mrs. Kim and Mr. Kim. The woman inquires of her spouse why Mr. Cha has not yet replied. Her impatience intensifies with each passing moment. She instructs him to contact Mr. Cha. Mr. Kim advises her to exercise patience, assuring her that Mr. Cha will return the call once he has finished handling their predicament. Elsewhere, we also glimpse their daughter, who releases a sigh just as the telephone emits a ringing tone. The restless woman swiftly directs her husband to activate the speakerphone so that she can personally hear the information. Mr. Kim initiates the conversation by expressing his apologies to Mr. Cha, stating he regrets the unreasonable request his wife compelled him to make. However, the woman, they continue to vociferously argue, asserting that their offspring were assaulted. Thus, she fails to grasp how the situation can be deemed absurd, to the astonishment of everyone present. Mr. Cha declares that he is the one who owes an apology. Mr. Kim requests clarification, and Mr. Chi discloses that it appears their children have provoked the wrong individual, because Mr. Cha himself was also vanquished by the young man. This revelation profoundly shocks Mr. Kim. To his knowledge, Mr. Cha is the most formidable enforcer in the field, and it's inconceivable that he was bested by an adolescent. At that very moment, the office door begins to tremble as someone attempts to force entry. Both Mr. and Mrs. Kim gaze apprehensively at the door. When it finally swings open with a creak, they perceive soldiers sprawled on the floor, leaving the husband and wife utterly distressed and apprehensive. Even their spoiled daughter leaps from her chair when they observe Jin sauntering into the room. The door behind him slams shut with a resounding thud, abandoning their insensible security personnel on the far side. Mr. Cha, still engaged in his phone call, swiftly discerns that Jin has infiltrated their premises. He reclines, releasing a sigh of resignation. He's still attempting to comprehend the reality of being defeated by a lone adolescent. He's now apprehensive about resolving this predicament. Within the chamber, Huijin springs from her chair as Mrs. Kim berates Jin, insisting on knowing if he's the youth who assaulted her offspring. Across the room, the gentleman at the desk inquires as to how Jin gained entry to his office. At that moment, the irate woman clenches her jaw in exasperation because she's infuriated that her spouse isn't mirroring her outrage. The husband maintains his composure and reiterates his question, more firmly about how Jin bypassed security. Jin merely shrugs and nonchalantly responds that he simply walked past the guards obstructing the entranceway. Mr. Kim is further astonished and bewildered, unable to grasp how Jin triumphed over Mr. Cha and the entirety of the security personnel. What perplexes him even further is how Jin ascertained his residence. The obnoxious woman resumes shouting, demanding Jin cease his disrespectful behavior. She swiftly starts dialing the emergency services line to accuse Jin of harming her children and illegally entering the office. Meanwhile, Hui-jin experiences a surge of self-satisfaction at her mother's actions. She deems summoning law enforcement a prudent decision, reasoning that even if Jin possesses remarkable combat abilities, legal authorities will handle him. The haughty mother attempts to cow Jin with her pronouncements, asserting she'll contact the police or even the prosecutor because she assumes Jin is unaware of whom he's confronting. Jin, however, maintains his composure and replies that he's quite informed. He indicates that her spouse is a two-term assemblyman, presently campaigning for re-election. The woman scoffs, inquiring of Jin, if he's so knowledgeable about their position, then why did he attack her offspring? On the other hand, Hui-jin wears a condescending smirk, feeling confident they have trapped Jin. She softly informs him it's the end of the game. Law enforcement answers the call, and the woman starts shouting into the receiver, insisting that officers arrive at Mr. Kim's office immediately. But before she can utter another word, she becomes speechless upon hearing something startling. It seems Jin plays the complete recording from the karaoke lounge, where Hui-jin and her accomplices attacked her sibling. The irrefutable proof renders Hui-jin silent, her eyes widening in astonishment as if they might bulge from their sockets. Mr. Kim remains quiet, feeling utterly heartbroken. Deok's pleas for mercy reverberate throughout the room as the vulgar women continue to brutally beat her. Witnessing the damning evidence, Mrs. Kim's mouth gapes open and she abruptly disconnects the emergency line, stating she will return their call shortly. Meanwhile, Hui-jin starts screaming at Jin, inquiring how he obtained those recordings. Jin pauses for a moment. The scene then abruptly shifts to the exterior of the Kim residence. Within one of the rooms, Jin is observed stealthily moving about the house. He accesses a laptop and transfers all the information onto a flash drive. In the present, Mr. Kim clenches his jaw in exasperation, harboring the sentiment that his offspring are a complete letdown. However, Hui-jin swiftly attempts to console her father, asserting that she possessed a valid justification for every action. Mr. Kim nonetheless irascibly commands her to be silent. Jin subsequently discloses that he also possesses documents implicating Gi-soo Kim. He clarifies to the Kims that their children habitually record videos of their exploits. He affirms possession of numerous recordings showcasing their brutal conduct, physically assaulting fellow students at school, coercing money and possessions from their targets, and even the most recent footage, depicting his sister enduring an attack by a group of females at a karaoke establishment. Hui-jin is trembling intensely as these shocking revelations detonate around her. However, alleging that our son is merely attempting to intimidate them, and that there will be repercussions for his actions. But Jin counters that he didn't instigate this conflict, and his current actions hardly constitute a menace. In comparison to employing a group of thugs to assault him, he further reveals that he has documented the entire incident. The father displays his profound dismay with a facepalm, and inquires of our protagonist, "Did you orchestrate all of this simply because my children initially harmed your sister?" Jin retorts that, as a guardian, they possess the inherent right to unequivocally defend their offspring. Therefore, as a sibling, he will utilize any necessary means to safeguard his sister as well. The man comprehends his perspective and states that they will assume responsibility for her medical expenses and propose a substantial compensation to rectify the situation. However, our young man asserts that this is unnecessary. Perplexed, the father questions the meaning of his statement. He then probes whether Jin desires an apology from his children to his sister, and contemplates that she would sooner endure self-inflicted harm than offer an apology. On the contrary, our protagonist makes it evident that mere words of remorse cannot erase the terror and suffering his sister endured. Therefore, he asserts that if they genuinely desire to make amends, his sister must never again encounter Jisoo or Hui-jin Kim. This stipulation unnerves Hui-jin, but her father readily consents. He declares that he will arrange for his children to switch educational institutions, or perhaps even send them overseas for academic pursuits. Predictably, the mother and daughter erupt in a shrill outcry of dissent. However, the father swiftly silences them and redirects his focus to our protagonist, inquiring if this proposition will suffice. Our protagonist demands their expulsion from the school, effective immediately. In response, the father promises to notify the school administration. With the matter seemingly resolved, Huijin begins to weep, and her tears stream uncontrollably, just as our protagonist departs. The patriarch swiftly intervenes, reminding him that, since he acquiesced to the stipulations, he desires the young man to erase all the recordings he discovered. The lad shoots the elder a menacing glare, and the father discerns from the fierceness in his eyes that such a lethal look doesn't befit an adolescent. Jim asserts his intelligence and proceeds to depart, slamming the office door shut with a resounding crash. Once outside, he finally heads homeward. His grandfather hastily opens the door, inquiring about his well-being, as Dion is observed weeping in the background. Jin is taken aback by their concern for him, but he offers a smile and assures them that no one overheard him. As he enters the dwelling, the elderly man remarks that the individuals they encountered appeared menacing. Jin responds that they merely stopped by for a conversation, nothing more. His sister subsequently expresses her unease about those individuals, stating that she and Grandpa were deeply apprehensive. Jin promptly urges her to dismiss her worries, aside from recuperating. Jin then implies to his sibling that henceforth she will no longer need to descend the staircase, as he has resolved the issue. Naturally, this is currently incomprehensible to her, but she will likely decipher his meaning shortly. The following morning, they proceed to their educational institution. Upon entering, they separate to attend their respective courses. As Dion enters her classroom, she attempts to avert her gaze from Huijin. However, her footsteps hesitate when she overhears fellow students discussing Huijin's absence from school. The entire class is filled with inquiries about the incident, and one of the girls clarifies that Huijin and her brother are embarking on international studies. This information strikes Dion as a completely unexpected shock, because her primary adversary has finally withdrawn from school. Jin's prior statement regarding addressing the staircase she had tumbled down. As the scenario replays in her thoughts, she swiftly deduces that he was aware of Huijin's relocation from the outset. Dion bolts from the lecture hall to confront him regarding this matter. When she locates him and addresses him, he faces her, but the instant she attempts to articulate her thoughts, she becomes speechless and falls silent. Jin merely offers a smile and utters, "See you later," leaving Dion on the verge of tears. She manages to respond with a quiet, "See you later," before succumbing to her emotions. Her feelings completely engulf her. Moments later, we are transported to a residence where a fair-haired young woman inquires of her companions if it's accurate that Huijin is relocating to a foreign country. One of the other females verifies the truth of the rumor, stating that she was astonished upon initially hearing it, but remains clueless as to the reason for their abrupt departure. Huijin had never alluded to relocating overseas. The fair-haired girl then directs her attention to Chicken Shake, who remains seated in silence and appears engrossed in her own thoughts, unable to answer. One of the girls jolts her from her daydream and inquires if she has any comment on the matter. This deeply unsettles the shy girl, and the fair-haired girl asks her point-blank if Huijin is truly relocating abroad, reasoning that since they share the same class, Chicken Shake might possess further knowledge on the subject. Hesitantly and nervously, the girl affirms the rumor, adding that their instructor informed the class earlier. The blonde girl then questions if she attempted contacting Huijin directly. Chicken Shake confesses that she did, but Huijin didn't answer the phone. Upon hearing this, all the girls begin to suspect it might be factual. In the meantime, Chicken Shake anxiously glances at her phone, gnawing on her nails with apprehension. The final text she received from Huijin stated that her mother would look after our boy. And since then, Chicken Shake has been extremely worried, contemplating if Huijin's abrupt departure is related to him. At that very moment, Huijin herself enters the room, visibly enraged. The girls are astonished by her appearance. Huijin settles onto the couch, complaining about her narrow escape from her home. The girls inquire whether Huijin is truly relocating abroad. An exasperated Huijin clutches her head and explains that it occurred unexpectedly, but she will return after a single term. The scene transitions to a flashback, revealing her father instructing her to study abroad for a semester. He assures her that he will resolve everything before her return. as he also desires to prevent the videos from becoming public. However, she conceals this information. The other girls simply chuckle and playfully tease her, remarking that she will relish her time off. The blonde girl scoffs, evidently irritated by their demeanor. Another girl questions the abrupt departure and whether Gisu will accompany her. Huijin curtly states that it's a private family affair requiring no further explanation. The redhead then inquisitive about the outcome of events, and whether Gisu triumphed over their friend. Huijin advises them against inquiring, asserting that Gisu has likely resolved the matter. Yet it's evident that she's merely avoiding acknowledging her brother's and his cohort's utter defeat at the hands of their companion. Such an admission would be too mortifying. Her agitation intensifies, contemplating Dion's satisfaction upon her departure from the school. This vexation ignites a scheme within her, and she resolves to provoke Dion one final time. She enlists her friend's assistance in her plot. Her companions question the necessity of her actions, and even Chicken Shake recoils in astonishment, expressing her apprehension. But Huijin maintains that they should consider Dane's arrogance. Without a target for her bullying, she intends to confront Daeon before departing Korea. Determined to exact her retribution, Chicken Shake becomes increasingly apprehensive and fearful as Huijin's devious scheme continues to unfold. Huijin becomes arrogant, bragging that Diane's grandfather is employed as a security officer at an undisclosed location, and she intends to manipulate her mother into having him terminated. She's convinced this will serve as a harsh lesson for Diane, demonstrating the consequences of crossing anyone affiliated with the Kim family. This is truly appalling. Diane is merely an innocent bystander, and Huijin's machinations are enough to induce nausea in anyone. But before this despicable woman can execute her unsettling intentions, her face blanches upon seeing a silhouette standing before her, concealed beneath a hooded garment and a facial covering. It doesn't require much time for her to deduce that it must be Jin. However, Jin executes a typical. He gestures with a playing card and inquires about Jin's identity. He probes her certainty, given the mask concealing his features, and her inability to see his countenance. He nonchalantly states his purpose is merely to ensure everyone's enjoyment. He expresses satisfaction at recognizing everyone from the karaoke session recording, captured on video. One girl, visibly shaken, questions his meaning. At that moment, the young man reminds them of the location where they filmed his sister's assault. The color drains from Huijin's face as she grasps his potential presence there, lying in wait solely to torment her. Chicken Shake perspires profusely and trembles noticeably, acutely anticipating the impending consequences. The remaining two girls remain utterly speechless. The other two girls remain completely and unsettlingly quiet. The young man begins closing the door, inquiring about the absence of singing. He remarks on his presumption that everyone present enjoyed vocalizing along with boisterous music. With that, he abruptly slams the door shut, leaving us completely in the dark about his subsequent actions. The scene shifts to the hospital where the Kim family is assembled. In Kim, the patriarch is visibly agitated, demanding to know Huijin's whereabouts. Her sibling clarifies that she went to bid farewell to her companions. Inbi's exasperation intensifies as he questions her departure, when she was instructed to remain on site until they had resolved everything. Suddenly, a man rushes into the room, swiftly activating the television and informing his superior that he needs to witness the unfolding events. On the screen, it's evident that our protagonist has already disseminated the recordings of Huijin's actions, making them widespread online. The footage is rapidly proliferating, and the circumstances are quickly transforming into a public spectacle. The entire Kim family is rendered speechless as they observe the broadcast. The journalist continues to deliver shocking revelations, disclosing that numerous violent recordings are circulating, with potentially many more incidents undocumented. Citizen organizations and legislators are now suggesting a specialized piece of legis to ensure the perpetrators face legal consequences. Gizu begins to lose his composure, and the journalist adds that the country is particularly outraged by the disclosure that the offenders are the offspring of a political candidate. Judging by Kim's reaction, it's evident the father is in serious jeopardy, and it's all due to his audacious spouse, who escalated the situation to this critical point. Considering Huijin's scheme to remove our grandfather from his position, it appears they're receiving the just desserts they deserve. The scene shifts back to our protagonist being interrogated by Mr. Cha, who insists on knowing why he proceeded with his strategy, when he had previously reached an understanding with the Kim family. Our protagonist's thoughts revert to a past event, where we observe him, discovering the extent of the Kim family's influential political affiliations. He discloses that it was highly improbable that matters would have unfolded without complications. Therefore, he took the actions he deemed necessary. In the present, he confesses that he did not uphold the prior arrangement they had made. Mr. Cha inquires if he genuinely believes the Kim clan will permit him to depart unscathed. Our protagonist confidently proclaims that he's likely the least of their concerns. Currently, it appears our young man might be correct. The journalist proceeds to unveil further shocking revelations, disclosing fresh proof of Chairman Kim's complicity in illicit financial transactions, corruption, and electoral manipulation. The evidence is so incriminating that even his political allies are demanding a rigorous inquiry, with everyone attempting to sever connections to avert damage to their faction. The moment Mr. Kim hears this news, he collapses onto the mattress like an inanimate object. Returning to Mr. Cha, he appears to surmise that our protagonist has unearthed information regarding his history, and Cha is reluctant to face legal repercussions. Similar to the Kim family, thus he promptly asks about our MC's true identity. Our hero replies simply, stating he's merely a typical adolescent. Mr. Cha offers a wry smile at this absurd statement, observing that nothing about Jin is ordinary. The setting transitions to the classroom, where the girls are experiencing a mix of anxiety and flushed cheeks upon seeing Jin. They converse in hushed tones, attempting to summon the bravery to approach him and inquire about something. However, everyone remains too timid to initiate contact. As Jin sits deep in contemplation, his cellular device vibrates. It's Dayan. She informs him that she's capable of walking home unaccompanied today, and suggests he relax and spend time with his companions. Jin is perplexed by the notion of socializing, and ponders how to proceed. Just then, one of his comrades, Yongchan, appears and greets him. As Yongchan takes a seat, he inquires about Jin's availability. Our protagonist remains speechless, prompting Yongchan to recall that Jin invariably escorts his younger sister home. Therefore, he must be occupied after school. However, unsurprisingly, Jin informs his companion that he's unexpectedly available today. Yongchan's expression radiates with delight, and they arrange to spend time together after classes. Nevertheless, Yunchan's exuberance swiftly dissipates upon hearing an irritating voice. As the camera perspective widens, we observe the two classroom tormentors approaching. Both disclose that they've caught wind of the news and are aware that Jin is responsible for Gisu Kim's impending relocation overseas. Yongchan is utterly astonished by this revelation, and the other students relaxing nearby are equally taken aback. The bullies divulge that, despite Gisu and his sibling being prepared for their international move, they are now stranded because their entire family is in serious trouble following the information disclosure. Our protagonist intervenes to clarify the situation, informing the bullies that they have completely misconstrued the events. But Jae-hyung interjects, stating that there's no need for humility because it's common knowledge. Our friend demolished Gisu and his gang at their headquarters. A few days back, Hyokjin corroborated the story, clarifying that Jin single-handedly defeated them all. And now, rumor has it that Gisu is too humiliated to appear at school. He's eager to learn the extent of the beating Gisu endured. That forced him to flee the country. Yongchan is finally persuaded that Jin is indeed a proficient combatant, and that his triumph that day wasn't merely a fluke. Hyokjin leans closer and remarks, now that they're free from that nuisance. He's keen on organizing a celebration, so he invites our companion to join the festivities after school. Jae-hyung concurs, adding that they've been classmates for several days, without truly connecting. He proposes showing our friend around the neighborhood. However, our protagonist declines their invitation outright, stating that he already has engagements for the day. Naturally, the bullies are perplexed and inquire about his intentions. With an amiable grin, Jin responds that he intends to spend time with Yongchun. That's when Ji-hyung insidiously approaches with a repulsive smirk, inclining towards Yongchun and stating he'll participate in their gathering. Hyokjin also draws near to the apprehensive young man and conveys his wish to partake. As well, after compelling Yongchan's consent, they begin to depart, mentioning they'll convene later. Our protagonist swiftly inquires of his companion if he genuinely wants to permit these bullies to join them, and the timid individual stammers an affirmative reply, his face ashen. The instructor finally enters the classroom, accompanied by two new pupils. One of them is an unremarkable boy, but the true spectacle is a breathtakingly beautiful girl with striking raven hair. Yongchan's eyes instantly brighten upon seeing her, and our protagonist rapidly asks if he's acquainted with them. Yongchan clarifies that everyone recognizes this girl. She's Yonasin, and her grandfather heads SW Corporation, the foremost enterprise in Korea. The boy beside her is Sokju company, and whispers circulate that he's been by her side since childhood. He's perceived as both her confidant and protector. The instructor remarks that given everyone's acquaintance with the pair, she'll forego formal introductions. She discloses that they've both been pursuing studies in the United States for the past 2 years and will be integrating into the class commencing today. The Beta Lassies appear less than enthusiastic about these new additions. With only Jin present in the classroom previously, their prospects of dominating the class were negligible. But now, with this duo in attendance, they're uncertain if they can even contemplate intimidating anyone. In the meantime, young Chun was inquisitive about the 2 supplementary desks, but their purpose is now apparent. He can't help but reflect that Yona appears even more captivating than he recalled. Even fellow students find it difficult to avert their gaze. As Seokju, trailing behind the young woman, advances, he inadvertently observes our protagonist, and their gazes briefly connect. Yona as well can't help but steal a glance at him as she strolls by. Once both new arrivals are seated, Soju informs Yona that the young man wasn't included in the assessment he obtained a week prior, and he desires to verify this. Yona is piqued and observes the young man once again. It's evident that her curiosity about him is undeniable. The young man perceives Yona's glances, and upon returning her gaze, discovers her smiling. However, he simply averts his eyes. This action appears to vex her, as her smile wasn't reciprocated. Meanwhile, young Chow resumes their dialogue, and inquires if there's a specific location he wishes to visit. Jin expresses contentment with any destination. Consequently, young Chow proposes visiting the arcade. Well, it appears the phrase gaming room evokes certain recollections for the young man, as his companions elaborate that it's in close proximity and recently upgraded its computers. At that moment, we're transported to a scene from the past, where we discern the commanding voice of a superior officer, addressing a contingent of recruits, informing them that they will commence today's segment of their real-world skills development. Curriculum. He elucidates that there's one piece of knowledge every Korean adolescent must possess, and that is familiarity with the internet cafe. This marks the initial instance our protagonist has encountered the concept of an internet cafe. The officer elaborates further, stating that internet cafes provide personal computers for a nominal charge and are accessible to both pupils and grown-ups. Intrigued, our young man inquires about the activities undertaken there. The officer clarifies that while some patrons peruse the web or view adult content, the majority utilize the facilities for gaming. For the typical secondary school student, upwards of 90% engage in some form of computer gameplay. The officer then proceeds to introduce some of the prevalent titles. Initially, there's Legends of League, succeeded by Battle Royale. Returning to the present, our protagonist contemplates how he can finally utilize the major's information. In the meantime, young Chan adds that they'll also snag some noodles at the arcade, and perhaps visit a koinka afterwards. Well, it appears koinka is yet another expression our protagonist acquired during his time in the service. While gaining knowledge about everyday living, the older student clarifies that high school students often frequent coin-operated karaoke, also called koinka. These venues essentially provide sing-alongs for just a handful of coins. Major Kang advises our young man to have a couple of songs ready to perform, should he decide to visit one, and commits to sending him a selection of current hits for teenagers his age to familiarize themselves with. As our guy begins contemplating options and attempting to recall some tunes, his companion sits anxiously nearby, puzzled by Jin's sudden serious demeanor. When the bell chimes, the pupils depart for the day, and that's when we spot the attractive girl once more. And as is customary, she's accompanied by her fortunate. It seems they're discussing our protagonist and uncover that he enrolled just a handful of days prior. He's 18 years of age, and coincidentally is Dion Yu's elder sibling. Yona is astonished to discover that Dion has a brother, as she believed her sole relative was her grandfather. Seokuko concurs, and clarifies that Dion has resided with her paternal grandfather ever since her parents and brother perished in an airplane accident. Yona then inquires how she could still have a brother. Seokuko responds that it's difficult to comprehend, but seemingly her deceased brother has unexpectedly returned to life. Right before their school transfer, he proposes they delve further into our protagonist's history. In the meantime, it's grown quite late, and we observe our protagonist walking alone. His cellular device constantly buzzes with messages from his companions, indicating they had a wonderful time at the arcade. We glimpse back at the gaming club where we see Hawk Jin, our protagonist, Jo Huang, and Young Chan all spending time together. Everyone is impressed by how Young Chan dominated the game, Jae-hyung even inquires about his standing. They speculated he must be diamond or master tier. Their mouths gaped open in astonishment when Young Chan humbly disclosed that he was actually at challenger rank. From that instant, their demeanor towards Young Chan transformed entirely. In the current moment, even our protagonist found this abrupt shift peculiar, as they continued conversing enthusiastically about Young Chan's remarkable ranking. While he was glancing at his mobile phone, his sibling appeared. He promptly inquired about her presence there. She clarified that they had depleted their supply of refuse sacks at home, so she had gone to acquire some and also procured a few snacks. Our protagonist proposed to assist with the bags, but his kind-hearted sister maintained it wasn't necessary. She then questioned if he had been spending time with his companions, and he affirmed that he had. She experienced a comforting feeling of reassurance, delighted to observe that he had formed friendships, and that individuals weren't shunning him due to the altercation. When she inquired about his whereabouts, he frankly responded that he had gone to the arcade. Apparently, this wasn't quite the answer she had anticipated, as she pondered that he might have cultivated different pastimes after residing abroad for such a duration. Inquisitive about her own academic encounters, he inquires about her experiences. She hesitates briefly, before replying that school hasn't been this enjoyable in ages. She subsequently asks if he also partook in a meal. He affirms, stating they had a fantastic time at the arcade, where a plethora of snacks were accessible. He then inquires about her agenda, and she indicates that she's anticipating her grandfather's return, so they can dine together. Our protagonist then proposes joining them, which perplexes her as she presumed he had already eaten. He sheepishly confesses that he's still somewhat peckish. The audience is already cognizant of this fact. Our young man simply desires some meaningful familial interaction. Upon their arrival home, a feast of delectable dishes is presented on the dining table, and they all appear to be thoroughly enjoying their shared meal. It does appear peculiar that grandfather merely holds a security position. Nevertheless, they boast a diverse culinary spread each day. It's somewhat perplexing how they accomplish this feat. As they merrily dine together, our protagonist's mind wanders back to his mercenary past. After a brief moment, he dispels the sentimentality and resumes smiling. Suddenly, his cellular device vibrates. It's a call from Commander Kang. The commander reminds him to address him informally as bro, rather than using his formal title. The commander inquires about his well-being, and our young man responds that he's thriving. However, when the commander probes about his academic life, an uncomfortable silence hangs in the air, becoming slightly apprehensive in response. The commander abruptly asks if our protagonist has taken a life. Jin promptly denies any involvement, but he concedes that he encountered a minor predicament that was swiftly resolved. The superior officer releases a breath of relief, and our young man assures him that everything is now harmonious, and there's no cause for concern. Kang expresses relief, reassuring their friend of their unwavering support. In return, Jin vows to remember their kindness. The following day at school, the trio is seen in their classroom. However, their companion is conspicuously absent. Young Chan appears somewhat uneasy. Among the two bullies, Jae-hyung begins posing peculiar inquiries. With a curious tone, he inquires about who they believe would triumph in a hypothetical altercation between Jin and Seokju Company. Hyuk-jin remarks that although Jin is skilled, he likely wouldn't be able to overcome Seokju Ko, who has undergone combat training since childhood. To him, their friend seems comparatively inexperienced. Ji-hyung concurs, adding that Seokju Ko is a formidable opponent. A flustered Young Chan then questions the veracity of the rumor that Seokju Ko battled 20 individuals. One of the bullies, with blonde hair, swiftly corrects him, stating that the actual number was 30 opponents. The figure momentarily astounds Young Chan. He even briefly ceases respiration. The bully with brown hair clarifies that, when a band of street hoodlums was harassing Yona, since Sochuko neutralized them all, he claims it began with 10 individuals, but their numbers swelled until 30 men confronted him. Seokju remained unyielding. He departed unscathed, leaving the 30 thugs incapacitated on the pavement. Like discarded playthings, the apprehensive boy then inquired about the circulating rumors regarding Seokju apprehending the abductors, who had taken Yona. He'd heard that the perpetrators were all former military personnel. The fair-haired youth swiftly affirmed that the account of Seokju capturing the kidnappers was likely accurate. Furthermore, he asserted that Jin was no match for Seokju, because he operated on an entirely different plane of existence. It's occasionally comical to consider that adolescents in these Korean manhwa single-handedly dismantle entire criminal organizations, independently making the government and all those intelligence and law enforcement agencies appear as though they're squandering taxpayer funds. Meanwhile, our protagonist abruptly halts in the hallway, finding himself face to face with Sokju. Without a moment's hesitation, Sokju directly inquires about his presence there. Perplexed, our young man makes it evident that he's completely oblivious to Sokju's insinuations. Sokju simplifies his line of questioning and demands to know why he's being deceptive about his true identity. He alleges that he's heard rumors of our protagonist's involvement in the matter of Gyesu and Huijin Kim. Responding, Jin clarifies that he did have a past conflict with Gyesu, but he had absolutely no connection to their relocation. At that point, Sokju reveals that he contacted the school our protagonist supposedly attended while abroad, and they have no record of him. The tension in the air thickens palpably, but before we can witness our hero's reaction to Sokju's accusation, the scene transitions to Diane. She's approached by Yona, the striking young woman from the previous encounter. After a brief period, the two women are engaged in conversation, and Diane expresses her surprise at Yona's return to Korea. Yona clarifies that she commenced school just yesterday and shares the same homeroom as her sibling. Daeon reacts with astonishment. Yona proceeds to mention that she has no recollection of Dion ever speaking of a brother. Dion then elucidates that everyone presumed her brother perished in the accident that claimed her parents' lives a decade ago, but he miraculously endured. They discovered his survival only 6 months prior. The narrative abruptly shifts to the past once more. Dion has just arrived back at her residence and discovers her grandfather paralyzed. Clutching the telephone handset, tears cascade down his cheeks as he divulges the astounding news that Gin is still living. This bombshell leaves Dion utterly speechless. This is the moment she learns of her brother's continued existence. Returning to the present, Yona inquires why nobody was aware of her brother's survival for so many years, if he was indeed alive yet made no contact. Dayan elucidates that Jin suffered amnesia in the accident, and only recently has he commenced recovering fragments of his memory, and someone assisted them in locating and re-establishing contact with him. Yona, visibly dubious, struggles to accept the information. Dayon affirms that Jin possesses only vague recollections of a grandfather and a younger sibling following the questioning. Yona offers a warm smile and remarks that their grandfather must have been elated by his grandson's return. Yona states that their grandfather is indeed overwhelmed with joy, clarifying that upon receiving the news, he wept for hours and subsequently took a leave from work to register for culinary courses. He desired to enhance his Korean cooking abilities, reasoning that Jin might have lacked such cuisine during his upbringing. Yona observes that their grandpa must deeply cherish his grandchildren. Dayan smiles, concurring that he undoubtedly does. However, Yona then poses a grave question, inquiring if she is absolutely certain Jin is her sibling. Diane appears slightly taken aback, but swiftly provides an affirmative reply. She asserts that Gin is unequivocally her sibling, and they even underwent a DNA analysis for confirmation. Our protagonist then inquires why Yona is so intrigued by her brother. This query visibly catches Yona unprepared. As she is uncertain of what to articulate, she hastily and almost desperately asks if her brother is romantically involved. The scene then transitions back to our male lead, who questions Seokju about the meaning of his words. Seokju reiterates his inquiry, inquisitively asking about the significance of this particular institution. That compelled our protagonist to falsify his documentation for enrollment. Jin counters by asking if he's being accused of possessing fraudulent credentials. Seokyu affirms this allegation, stating their fabrication is evident because his investigation revealed Jin never resided in that municipality. Furthermore, the educational establishment he purportedly attended lacks any record of his presence. Our protagonist then requests evidence and reminds Sujokju that if he's alleging the documents are fabricated, there must be substantiation to corroborate his assertion. Sejokju is briefly perplexed about how to address this inquiry. He uncovered the inconsistency by investigating and conversing with individuals affiliated with the foreign institution. However, he lacks concrete evidence. He's astonished by Jin's composure in the situation, remaining unfazed and displaying no signs of alarm. Subsequently, our protagonist finally inquires why Sejokju is conducting a background check on him. In reply, the acne-ridden individual elucidates that he can't remain idle and observe a dubious individual who might present a danger to his employer. A brief period of silence ensues between them, but then our protagonist ultimately responds, stating he returned home. Seokju is bewildered by this ambiguous reply. So our protagonist clarifies that he was questioned about his purpose for coming and his answer is simply that he returned from abroad for his family. With that, our protagonist begins to depart. Sejokju gazes after him with distrustful eyes, believing that since he already harbors suspicions about our protagonist's fabricated credentials, it's only a matter of time before he uncovers his genuine identity. Once the lesson commences, we find Jae-hyung quietly engrossed in a video game, while the blonde-haired individual casually browses his phone. Our protagonist, Jin, observes that both Seochu and Yona are conspicuously absent from the classroom. He's fascinated by the speed at which these two newcomers, having just enrolled yesterday, successfully acquired so much intelligence about him in under 24 hours. As the bell signals the start of break, the antagonistic classmates approach young Chan, extending an invitation to join them in gaming and improve their rankings. They also include Jin in their invitation, but he politely declines, explaining that it's his grandfather's birthday celebration. The bullies decide to spend time together on their own, and young Chan readily agrees to participate. Meanwhile, the scene shifts back to the enigmatic woman, where Seokju is updating her on the current circumstances. He asserts with conviction that Jin undoubtedly falsified his entire academic history, and even casts doubt on the legitimacy of the DNA analysis. Seokju continues by stating that his investigation unearthed some disturbing information about his sister. Apparently, Dion has been subjected to severe harassment by Gizu, Kim, and his cohorts for the past 2 years. When Yona inquires about the severity of the situation, Seochu replies that it's enough to make anyone question how she withstood the torment for so long. He clarifies that the recordings of her abuse weren't widely disseminated, but he's quite certain the aggression she endured was equally grave. Yona is utterly astonished and can't help but reflect on the cruelty of children nowadays. Seochu adds that Jin has already incapacitated Gisu, Kim, and their group twice and rescued his sister from the abuse. Yona chuckles inwardly, thinking, it's rather endearing that her long-lost brother returns from the grave and vanquishes her tormentors, while her own siblings seemingly only desire to be rid of her. Yona's inquisitiveness overcomes her as she begins to connect the dots. She posits that if Gin had truly arrived at school with the intention of harming her, it's illogical that he would be so transparent about it. An astute individual would have remained inconspicuous. Xiaochu concurs, observing that someone with a genuine scheme would have maintained a low presence. Yona's thoughts begin to race once more, and she inquires if Jin might possess some sort of hidden agenda connected to Daeon's relatives. She raises the subject of the insurance payout from the aviation accident. Seokju then discloses that the grandfather collected it, but hasn't utilized it, allowing it to accumulate over time. Moreover, Grandpa reimbursed the portion of the funds that he obtained for Gin's supposed demise as he was still living. However, there's still a considerable sum remaining, so the prospect remains that he could be pursuing the money. Yona pieces together the clues and emphasizes that if Gin truly is seeking the funds, then it could imply Diane is imperiled by her own sibling. The setting returns to the supermarket, where our pair are perusing the aisles, and, as is customary, Jin is garnering considerable female attention. While they search for groceries, Diane inhales deeply and confesses her reluctance to inquire, but her inquisitiveness is overpowering. Thus, she yearns to understand his existence post-accident. Our protagonist remains momentarily silent, and the young woman begins apologizing profusely, stating he needn't respond if it's distressing, but he simply smiles, assuring her it's all right. He commences his narrative, explaining his profound psychological trauma. He could barely formulate coherent thoughts. He did everything necessary for survival. In a foreign land where he lacked linguistic comprehension, he remained perpetually occupied just to subsist. The young woman becomes quiet, processing this weighty disclosure. Then she begins to giggle and inquires if he was too preoccupied for romantic relationships during that period. He concurs with a chuckle. She then discloses her astonishment upon learning he shares the same homeroom as Yona, a fact Yona herself had divulged to her. Jin reacts with surprise and promptly inquires if she's acquainted with her. Dion elucidates that Yona was exceptionally kind to her prior to her relocation to the United States, and that she had greatly missed her. Consequently, upon seeing her again today, it was a joyous reunion. Then, with a mischievous grin, Dion reveals Yona even inquired if he was romantically involved. And naturally, our protagonist exhibits a rather predictable response upon hearing this. Later, back at the residence, the birthday festivities are well underway. The siblings present their grandfather with a present. As he unwraps it, he discovers a premium wallet within. His face beams with delight. He's genuinely moved and experiences a pang of guilt for their meager allowance, believing they must have overspent. However, his granddaughter simply offers a warm smile and assures him they had ample funds to procure a present. Furthermore, it wasn't overly pricey. The elderly man's hands quiver with joy as he clutches the wallet, his voice thick with sentiment. He declares that the greatest present he could ever desire was already bestowed upon him when Jin returned home safe and unharmed. Nothing could surpass that. Abruptly, the trill of a ringing telephone captures everyone's attention. Dion hastens to her room to respond. As she converses on the telephone, Jin attempts to listen in discreetly. That's when he overhears the girl stating that she's going to the convenience store briefly. The elderly gentleman inquires why she's venturing out at this late hour, and it emerges that she's leaving because Yona dropped by for a quick visit. It's evident that Jin definitely suspects something is amiss. Later that evening, Jin is engrossed in his computer, endeavoring to unearth everything he can about SW Corporation, which is under Yona's family's ownership. He's intrigued by Yona's apparent fascination with him, and their inquiry into the background of an ordinary, newly enrolled student such as himself. Jin contemplates his dialogue with Shokju when abruptly his grandfather's voice summons him. Upon entering the drawing room, his grandfather announces his imminent departure as well. The young man inquires if his destination is Daeon, and the elder seemingly concurs. He adds that he simply requires a breath of fresh air. Jin offers a smile and suggests his grandfather remain, proposing to check on her in his stead. However, the elderly gentleman insists on venturing out alone. Jin subsequently reminds him of his impending morning engagement. Finally, the young man resolves to depart on his own accord. Subsequently, we observe both young women engaged in conversation about academics and other subjects. Iona recounts her overseas educational experiences and proposes that Dion contemplate pursuing education abroad. Likewise, in return, Dion confesses she hadn't truly considered it previously. When Yona inquires why, Diane clarifies that it's quite expensive and would require her absence for a number of years, meaning she wouldn't see her grandfather for an extended period. Yona considers this somewhat peculiar, prompting Diane to elucidate further. She explains her desire to avoid leaving her grandfather solitary, particularly because his health hasn't been optimal lately. Nevertheless, she expresses gratitude for her brother's constant presence, as it provides her with significant comfort. In the meantime, Yona struggles to introduce the actual purpose of her visit. Given Daeon's apparent faith in her brother, she's uncertain how to raise the subject without instigating conflict. The scene then shifts to a brief flashback where Sokju informs Yona that a representative from the alleged foreign institution confirmed Daeon's brother's non-attendance there. They even examined his picture and affirmed he was never enrolled. Furthermore, the individual currently residing at his fabricated address furnished conclusive evidence that he never resided there. Shochu is also investigating additional clues, so Yona resolves she must convene with Dion to deliberate their findings. But Shoki reminds her, while they possess evidence of falsified documentation, they lack definitive proof he isn't Daeon's legitimate sibling. Yona is apprehensive, because the decades' worth of missing records are essentially fabricated. Given her current cohabitation with him, it's a significant matter that cannot be disregarded. She believes Diane deserves to know the truth regarding the documents, and wishes to at least inform her of their discoveries thus far. Currently, Yona is struggling to broach the principal subject of her visit, despite it being her primary purpose for coming. As Diane expresses her pleasure in conversing like this after such a long duration, we observe the young man approaching the two women. However, Seochu intercepts him. However, Jin merely attempts to bypass him. Yet the Wardi swiftly instructs him to remain. In Seokju's thoughts, he's certain Jin must be present, because he's apprehensive they'll divulge everything to Dion. Therefore, he promptly obstructs our companion's way and informs him that both ladies are simply conversing. He requests that he grant them a moment of privacy. Abruptly, a high-velocity Volkswagen comes hurtling towards them. Before anyone can respond, the vehicle crashes into both young men, toppling them like tenpins. They collide with the ground as the Volkswagen screeches to a standstill, precisely where the two women are seated. Jin attempts to rise, but it's evident he's gravely wounded, particularly around his cranium. As he struggles to concentrate, his dazed vision perceives some dubious individuals from the van, endeavoring to seize both of the women. Without delay, Jin commences sprinting frantically. However, his exertion is futile. The abductors have already apprehended the women, and there's no possibility of him outpacing a vehicle. Thus, they're rendered powerless and stranded. Both men swiftly exchange glances, and fueled by their fury, seize each other by the lapels. However, after a brief, heated exchange, they deduce that neither is culpable in the kidnapping. They release their grip. The raven-haired man instantly retrieves his cell phone and contacts the SW Corporation security personnel. He urgently informs them of Yona's abduction and instructs them to locate her using surveillance recordings. recordings. Meanwhile, Jin departs, prompting the dark-haired man to hastily inquire about his destination and question his involvement in the incident. Jin curtly responds that he lacks the time for disputes. Shoku emphasizes that SW Corporation Security is already addressing the matter and will soon locate the young woman. In the interim, Jin must remain with him to verify his identity. However, our protagonist asserts his intention to find his sister, and if Seokju desires to accompany him, he's more than happy to oblige. Seokju begins to suspect Jin might be innocent, after all, but then our protagonist abruptly halts and playfully inquires if Seokju brought his vehicle. The scene transitions to the vibrant epicenter of the city's nightlife. Inside a tavern, Mr. Shaw is lounging, smoking a cigarette and relishing his downtime. Suddenly, his subordinate informs him of a visitor. When Mr. Cha turns, he's met with the sight of Jin. The setting then changes to Saw Corporation, where an elegant woman sits enthroned. It's evident she's Yona's sibling, due to her striking resemblance, accentuated by her cascading dark hair. An aide abruptly enters the office. The woman appears irritated by the unexpected interruption and demands an explanation for his unannounced entrance before intruding. The aide swiftly relays that Yona has been abducted. The announcement astonishes the woman, yet remarkably, she doesn't appear overly disturbed by it. In fact, a subtle smile graces her lips. She seems to deduce that the circulating rumors must hold truth after all. It's unclear precisely what she's alluding to, but let's proceed nonetheless, she inquires. If their grandfather still intends to pursue the corporation, the aide expresses uncertainty. She reclines, harboring the hope that if he persists relentlessly, Yuna will ultimately perish. It's evidently an outcome she anticipates with relish. The scene shifts back to the tavern, where we rejoin the narrative with our protagonist encountering Cha. Seokju accompanies him. Seokju appears to already be acquainted with Cha, recognizing him from their records. He's intrigued by our protagonist's connection to this mobster. Shaw initiates the conversation by inquiring about our protagonist's desires. In response, Jin simply states he requires some information. Shaw ignites another cigarette and scoffs derisively, inquiring why he should even consider assisting him. Our protagonist gets straight to the point, disclosing that the granddaughter of the Saw Corporation has been abducted. That's certainly a revelation Cha didn't anticipate. However, he swiftly dismisses it, claiming it's not their concern and that they don't handle such matters. He explains that it would be incredibly perilous to antagonize the Saw Corporation. Our hero inquires if Cha possesses any clues to provide, but the mob boss makes it abundantly clear that he has no incentive to divulge anything, particularly since he's already in a precarious predicament, thanks to our protagonist's actions. That's when our hero reveals his younger sister was also taken captive, alongside Saw's granddaughter. Cha finally comprehends the gravity of his current situation, as provoking our hero's sister is akin to harming John Wick's dog. Both actions are equally hazardous. He proceeded to elaborate, stating that certain individuals speaking fragmented Korean were inquiring about discrete warehouses, along with disposable vehicles and additional personnel. The proposition was alluring, but he declined because involvement in such precarious activities isn't easily disassociated from. He added that he'd learned another group accepted the task, and to his knowledge, they were operating out of Incheon. That was the extent of his information. It wouldn't be unforeseen if Seokju had already ascertained the culprits behind this predicament. Meanwhile, our protagonist began to depart after expressing his final gratitude, but then the mob leader tossed his cellular device to our protagonist and instructed him to store his contact information. Jim gazed at him, perplexed, baffled as to why he would require his number. The crime boss became slightly irritated and elucidated that he would need it to reach him. After he investigated the warehouse further, with that, our protagonist commenced entering his digits. He inquires if the bicycle outside belongs to him. John comprehends precisely what our protagonist intends to do with it. Thus, he's reluctant to answer. But ultimately, our guy takes the hefty bicycle. And prior to departing, he instructs Seokju to devise his own method of getting there as he's taking the bike. Seokju questions if he should rely on this dubious, half-formed information and pursue the abductors. In response, our protagonist explains he lacks the time to squander, as Yona will likely remain safe until the captors obtain their demand. However, there's no certainty about what they might do to Daeon. Seokju grasps the rationale behind Jin's reasoning and remains silent. He discerns that Jin is a swift and astute thinker. Seokju then informs him that he's already relayed the information to his